how the mighty had fallen. And it had fallen hard. Literally. Zemir would certainly not have considered the Siege of Dharrovar among the most successful campaigns he had participated in as a Freeblade, and that was even before finding himself trapped at the bottom of a chasm. The conflict had been dirty, brutal, the kind of conflict that could not be settled in a glorious, decisive battle. Quite the opposite, in fact. The heretics of House Mandracore had been very careful to deny the forces of the Imperium any opportunity to deploy their superiority in men, equipment, and resources. Elusive and treacherous as snakes, the renegade knights clad in bronze and black used the harsh nature of their home planet to launch ambushes, lure their enemies into traps, emerge from tunnels carved into the mountains, and then vanish back into the shadows without leaving a trace, except for the trail of death and devastation. Even the scum in service to the renegade household, made up of cultists, beastmen, and mutants, seemed to have perfectly adapted to this kind of exhausting guerrilla warfare, to the point that the Loyalist forces, despite the shrewd and skillful leadership of the Astartes of the Castellans of the Rift, had made little progress so far in subduing Dharrovar. And the losses were beginning to weigh heavily. Not so much because of their quantity. After all, Zemir had seen entire battalions of Astra Militarum regiments thrown into the slaughter of war and suffer devastating losses, without it halting their march toward victory. Just as he knew that even the Astartes or the Blessed Sisters of Battle would gladly embrace death if it meant the fall of the enemy's bastions. No, every soldier of the Imperial Strike Force knew that their life was in service to the Emperor, and that it would return to him. Therefore, it wasn't the prospect of death itself that was sapping the morale of the Loyalists. It was the way it could come. It was easy to run through no man's land under the enemy's barrage fire. It was easy to perish in the explosion of one's own Leman Russ engaged in a conflict with the enemy's armored forces. But to continue to fight, march and endure in a cursed environment, having to suspect every shadow and every rustle, well, that was another matter. It wasn't easy to be aware that one could die without having the satisfaction of firing even a single shot at the enemy. It wasn't easy to know that one could die an ignoble death, falling into a pit full of sharpened stakes and being left impaled for hours and hours as a macabre trophy, until the blood finally ceased to flow, bringing the release of death. And it was terrible to know that any moment, the terrifying silhouette of a traitor knight could emerge from the shadows and turn a platoon of perfectly trained soldiers into helpless lambs before the wolf. Perhaps this was also why the group of Vostroyan Firstborn and Sisters of Battle had proven so tenaciously loyal to him. After all, not every scout detachment could boast the protection of a knight. Zemir suspected that even the name and designation of his own mount had contributed significantly in this regard, binding that composite squad into a devoted and united force with a shared purpose. What better than a relic could give the feeling of being protected by the Emperor's light, shining even on that corrupted world? And the Iron Saint, a Knight Warden piloted by Freeblade Zemir, sworn by solemn oaths to Chapter Master Bastien Grix of the Castellans of the Rift, was a relic unlike any other. And a relic remained a relic, even when shattered and lost, dozens of meters underground at the bottom of a rocky chasm on a damned planet ruled by heretics and mutants. The fact that yet another trap by the traitors had caught even the Iron Saint, making it sink into the soft ground and crash into what seemed to be an abandoned mineshaft, did not appear to have weakened the zeal of the soldiers accompanying it. Nor did the fact that the collapse had claimed the lives of 7 Firstborn and 2 Sisters of Battle. As soon as the Iron Saint had fallen beyond the possibility of being raised back to the surface, the men and women of the accompanying detachment had not hesitated. A grim determination had overcome them. Instead of scattering and abandoning the night to its fate and mourning the loss of their comrades, soldiers and Sisters of Battle alike had chosen to descend into the very crevice where the Saint had fallen, all to avoid abandoning their relic. Fierce debates had even accompanied the decision on who should remain above ground to alert the command about what had happened, and the messengers tasked with this mission had not left willingly. Ropes had been lowered to bring men and munitions to the bottom of the chasm. 3 more lives had been lost in that reckless descent, but even this had not dampened the spirits of the troops, nor made them reconsider their decision. All of this made no sense to Zemir. Having miraculously emerged with only a couple of broken ribs from his Mechanicum throne, Zamir had waited beside the hull of his mount, its silver and green livery nearly entirely worn away from the fall and the grinding against the rocks. He had railed against them, accusing them of being fools, suicides who would get themselves killed without any practical benefit for the war effort. Quite the opposite. Sergeant Ilyanov had replied as soon as he managed to plant his boots on the bottom of the chasm. Their intention was to live to fight again. After all, High Command wouldn't send any resources to rescue a handful of infantry scattered across Dharrovar in the midst of the offensive. But they wouldn't spare any means to recover a venerated knight bound by oaths of honor to the angels of the Emperor. The messengers would carry the news of the misfortune that had befallen them, while they would be waiting there as soon as the Imperial forces arrived to extract the Iron Saint from the trap it had fallen into. Zamir saw some logic in the Vostroyan's argument, and an endless series of flaws. A small detachment of infantry had a good chance of getting away. The very nature of the terrain on Dharrovar, which had so blunted the Imperial offensive, could turn into a valuable advantage for an operation like this. The soldiers could disappear into the mountains and later return on the slide to the rally point. On their own, they would be virtually invisible, while under the current circumstances, the Iron Saint could offer them very little protection. Instead of a bastion, it would become a dead weight. Worse, it would become a beacon for the enemy. After all, no hunter sets a snare without eventually checking if a hare has gotten caught in it. Zamir knew they didn't have much time. Within a few hours at most, the mining tunnels branching out from the crash site would be crawling with heretics eager to get their hands on whatever prey had triggered the trap. For a moment, the noble pondered if the soldiers in front of him were simply tired of the war and wanted to end it in a simple, quick way. He wondered, had he been their commissar, if they could be accused of cowardice? No, Zamir decided finally. The soldiers around the wounded knight didn't seem cowards at all. He could see them grinning under their imposing mustaches, typical of their planet, satisfied, like children who had just outsmarted an adult, presenting him with a fait accompli that left him no chance to oppose the situation. Their eyes gleamed with determination, and their hands gripped their lasguns firmly. No, this was not cowardice at all. It was loyalty. It was faith. The relic had protected them during the bloody campaign on Dharrovar, and this was their chance to return the favor. Somehow, the Saint continued to provide for all of them. Zamir received one final, no longer necessary confirmation of this when the Sisters of Battle stepped forward to have their say. Sister Agatha did not get lost in dubious strategic considerations. She simply reiterated that they had sworn to accompany the Iron Saint for the duration of the crusade. They would not break their vow. Despite the fury of seeing his will ignored, Zamir felt his heart stir at such declarations of devotion. None of the members of his retinue shared his noble blood, but their courage was pure, no different from that of the heroes who populated the epic poems he had listened to and re-listened to during his childhood.
I protect the people, and the people protect me.
Zamir felt a sense of fulfillment in seeing the creed of his life take such a concrete form before his eyes, yet he had to shake himself out of it quickly. Honor and courage always guaranteed victory for the heroes of epic poems, but Zamir knew that on Dharrovar this would not be enough. Time was short, and the enemy would arrive soon. It was a relief for him to realize that he could face this battle, as he always had, by actively contributing to the fight and not hiding, curled up, relying only on the protection his allies could provide him. The machine spirit of the Iron Saint was suffering, but it was not yet extinguished. Zamir melded his own pain with that of the mount and the electro spirits to call the knight back into battle once more. The fall had reduced the Iron Saint's left leg to little more than an unusable stump, but the right leg, though gravely damaged, still held firm, and the ceiling of the mine tunnel was high enough to allow the knight to rise, hunched and in a degrading semi-kneeling position, dragging behind the useless left leg, yes, but still able to fight. The Omnissiah had indeed granted the Iron Saint one final blessing. The Avenger Gatling cannon was fully operational. The first sign of the enemy's approach was the sound of dragging footsteps and laughter echoing along the rock walls of the northern tunnel. Soon after, the glow of their lumen lights appeared as they boldly made their way through the abyss. Those clues were enough to reveal the nature of their first wave. Jackals, not warriors, despite the weapons they carried. Zamir doubted that in their entire career as heretical lackeys, they'd ever faced anything other than the wounded and dying, and they wouldn't face anything else. As soon as Zamir judged them to be within range, he gave his mount a command and opened fire with the Avenger Gatling cannon. Caught before their bloodthirsty confidence gave way to doubt, causing them to scatter, the cultists in service to House Mandracore were torn apart. 3 seconds of fire, then silence to conserve the precious and limited ammunition and not overstrain the cannon's integrity. Apparently it was enough. The echo of surprised screams reverberated for a moment before fading, and then once again, silence.
Are they all dead?
Sergeant Ilyanov asked.
Seems so. Praise be the Emperor.
Sister Agatha proclaimed. Zamir once again set the Iron Saint at rest, fully aware that the absurd ease of that victory would be short-lived. He wasn't wrong. It took a few hours before the next assault came, and those weren't hours spent idly. The Vostroyan Firstborn had erected makeshift barricades, using rock debris and even venerable fragments of the Iron Saint's armor that had come off to prepare the group for the next firefight. Nothing that would withstand a serious barrage, but in that confined space, any advantage, no matter how small, could make a difference. And they would need every bit of help they could get. This time, Zamir didn't indulge in any illusions of an easy victory. It was immediately clear they wouldn't be facing mere raiders. Of course, cultists made up the first wave of the assault, but these in their own way were veterans of that kind of guerrilla warfare. They moved with something resembling coordination, passing from shadow to shadow, from cover to cover, marking their advance with grenade launcher shots. And there were many of them. Their aim wasn't great, but the rain of grenades still forced the infantry and the Sisters of Battle to keep their heads down and seek cover, without the luxury of carefully choosing their targets. Zamir decided to hold his fire. This wasn't a battle they could win with a single salvo. It was better to save shots for a valid target and leave the initial phase to his retinue. They were all seasoned warriors and would not be overwhelmed by such an opponent. He watched them respond with disciplined bursts of fire, punishing with bursts of flame who made the mistake of getting too close. His escort lacked numbers, but even so they outmatched the enemy in discipline, weaponry and will. The makeshift barricades offered them cover, while the Sisters of Battle's superb armor easily repelled the solid bullets that reached them. Zamir estimated that in those conditions, the soldiers surrounding him could easily maintain a kill ratio of 7-1, at a modest estimate, and that was if they were without his support, which they were not. He certainly did not expect them to suffer no losses, but it was still a shock when Sister Juliana's head exploded, hit by an enemy sniper shot.
Tunnel east! Tunnel east!
Boomed Sergeant Ilyanov, announcing the arrival of more enemies. The torso of the Iron Saint emitted a sinister creak as it rotated on its center of gravity, but Zamir still managed to unleash a punishing volley on Sister Juliana's killer. A hot bullet the size of a backpack tore apart the sniper rifle and the soldier wielding it, before his comrades threw smoke grenades and disappeared behind the thick grey curtain.
Bastards!
Boris cursed.
They said the Greys had deserted, but I didn't think those traitors would be so quick to shoot their old allies.
Zamir had also had time to see the dark uniforms of the traitor guard regiment before the smoke engulfed them. He remembered that the news of the disappearance of the vigilous Grey Riflemen had caused quite a stir in the previous days. The High Command had hoped that the entire brigade that disappeared overnight had been completely destroyed in an enemy ambush, possibly after taking with them as many heretics as possible. The Greys had changed sides in that campaign, and their new masters had sent them into the tunnels to test their new loyalty. Those damn ones had not yet had time to completely remove the Imperial Aquila from their equipment, nor the moth, symbol of their regiment. Zamir knew that this was the most dangerous kind of adversary, because they would receive no mercy from either side. Their old comrades wanted to see them gunned down as rabid dogs, while their new masters were just waiting for a moment of wavering to open fire on their backs. They could only advance and kill, or die. Lasers and plasma began to rain down from the eastern front, and although the loyalist soldiers returned fire bravely, dividing themselves between traitors and approaching cultists, the losses began to pile up on their side of the barricade as well. 5 Vostroyans and 2 Sisters of Battle fell, further thinning their already strained ranks, and the worst was yet to come. Zamir was the first to notice it, thanks to the premonition of like recognizing like. It began with a new tremor in the tunnel, different from the explosions and the din of the firefight. Mechanical footsteps. An instant later, the pink glow of his ionic shield flickered faintly in response to the hits he had received. Advancing behind the massive cultists with the bold confidence of archers of old, confident of striking the enemy with impunity, two towering mechanical figures had appeared. They were not as large as the Iron Saint, but were imposing enough to pose a serious and immediate threat, especially since their small size allowed for an agility that the crippled Iron Saint could never match. Zamir did not need to intensify his visors to recognize the autocannons they were equipped with. In his career, Zamir had frequently fought alongside noble knights classified as Helverin, but he knew that the code of chivalry forbade attributing such honored terminology to their traitorous cousins. With their carapace painted in the black and bronze of House Mandracore livery, and their metal plates bristling with macabre trophies, the two twin knights bore a far more sinister name: Executioners. Their first shots, however, had not lived up to their name.
What poor angles of fire,
Zamir thought, and around him he felt the painful approval of the machine spirits of the previous pilots. A clean shot, with the advantage of surprise against a damaged, immobilized enemy with an ionic shield only partially functioning. It should have been a mortal blow. In the old house of Zamir, squires who had failed so spectacularly would have been covered in shame and stripped of their honor of commanding a sacred knight in battle. Missing vitals with such a great advantage. As grateful as he was to still be alive and fighting, Zamir could not help but feel a pang of sadness at how low the corruption of chaos could bring his lost kin. The avenging Gatling cannon was not designed to pierce reinforced armored hulls. It excelled at tearing apart infantry, but could hold its own against relatively light vehicles such as the two executioners. This time, the Iron Saint had a harder time responding to his will. A metallic screeching, to say the least, accompanied his rotation as he tried to frame the targets. Zamir's head throbbed painfully as he tried to adjust his aim through the damaged aiming system, and his suffering must have also been transmitted to the machine spirit that inhabited the avenging cannon. The salvo of bullets came out of the gun's barrels in fits and starts, along with a suspicious amount of black smoke. Not ideal, but Zamir was still rewarded by the sight of the first executioner limping awkwardly out of the line of fire, his carapace riddled with bullets. More shots came from the heretic machines, and once again Zamir was astonished at the poor choice of targets his rivals had made. His waist, his shoulder, his right leg. No shots were aimed at the knight's helmet-shaped mask, nor at the heart of the carapace, nor in the direction of the reactor. Perhaps the demons desecrating the once proud machines simply couldn't fire with the accuracy they needed. Or perhaps... The terrible suspicion was confirmed when the Iron Saint attempted to return fire. He tried, because the new volley ended up losing most of its fire against the ceiling of the cave, only marginally grazing the armor of the still healthy executioner, who quickly responded. The cannon. They were aiming at the cannon. Why? Zamir couldn't waste too much time pondering the matter. With their protector engaged in a fight with the executioners, the soldiers of the escort were under more pressure than ever. With the reduced return fire due to the casualties among the ranks of the Vostroyans and the Sisters of Battle, the Greys and the cultists had taken advantage of the situation to close in and engage the loyalists in a bayonet fight. From his perch, Zamir watched as an Ogrin in the livery of the Grey Rifleman charged the line and broke through the makeshift barricade. His brutal mace slammed down left and right, killing a Sister of Battle with each blow before a third stepped forward to hit the abhuman monster with a melter-gun shot at point-blank range. Flesh and bone dissolved like wax without even giving the Ogrin time to scream. The line breathed, but only for a moment. It took one of the soldiers of the traitor regiment to reach the sister from behind and strike her down with a cleaver blow to the back of the head, preventing her from firing her melter gun again. The perimeter was broken, and the line was collapsing. The Iron Saint swung his gauntlet awkwardly, hitting two cultists and another member of the traitorous guard squarely. But with the pistons damaged, the blow lacked sufficient fluidity, and the remaining heretics were quick to throw themselves to the ground to avoid being smashed. The Vostroyan seized the moment to coldly execute the cultists on the ground, however, and the battle returned more ferociously than ever. For Zamir, moving the knight and shooting was now equivalent to a physical effort, made all the more excruciating by the broken ribs and the static coming from the barely functioning cables connected to his skull. Yet he refused to give up. The avenging Gatling cannon fired once more, and the wounded executioner staggered before crashing to the ground.
One to go,
thought Zamir, but it was still too many for the damaged Iron Saint. having adjusted his aim with the first shots. This time, the remaining heretic knight's autocannons hit the weapon arm with precision. The noble screamed in pain, as if it were his own limb and not the Iron Saint's metal one that had been amputated by the barrage of shots. It was the end, and it was approaching with great strides, and so was the battle at his feet. The brave resistance of the men and women of his escort had opened terrifying gaps between the attackers, whose corpses littered the rocky ground inside and outside the barricade line. 7-1, perhaps even more. Yet there was nothing the valiant sons of the Emperor could do against the numbers and ferocity of the enemy. Cultists and bloodthirsty maniacs rampaged among the few loyalists, while the traitorous guard kept their rifles ready, watching the scene, seemingly impassive. Zemir saw Sergeant Ilyanov fall under the onslaught of 4 cultists. The gruff soldier let out unusually heart-rending cries as the heretics cut his tendons with their blades and then began dragging him away by his wounded lower limbs. He saw other lost and damned overwhelm Sister Agatha, throwing nets over her and tightening their nooses. Alive. They were capturing them alive to drag them towards who knows what horrors. And in that epiphany, he also saw his own future. That explained the apparently imprecise shots of his enemies. The executioners had never really aimed to eliminate him. Rather, they wanted to render him helpless and immobile so they could take possession of the precious relic of his knight. In this way, the Iron Saint would fully share the fate of his poor, stupidly brave men. This was not supposed to be. Sergeant Ilyanov clung to a shard of rock and resisted, struggling against the cultists who dragged him away. Sister Agatha kicked and thrashed. All around, the remnants of the escort fought tooth and nail against the ignominy of being captured alive. The last executioner, now confident, approached for the final incapacitating blow. It was time.
No, fear not, my friends, my brave comrades, my band of brothers and sisters. I will not abandon you to the torture and horrors these beasts would have us suffer. It all ends now.
The metallic voice of the Iron Saint heartened the troops one last time.
The people defend me. I defend the people.
Zemir caressed the inside of the throne mechanicum and silently took his leave of the spirits of the former noble pilots. He closed his eyes, and the heroes of his childhood poems flowed into his mind. Heroes charging forward in one last glorious charge. Heroes defending the banner against hordes of enemies. A hero with a broken sword dying alone, blowing his horn one last time for all to hear. Zemir found comfort in that last image. Yes, like that. It was an honor to ride with you. Goodbye, my friends. It was his last thought before he fired the pulse that would overload the reactor. The white-hot explosion engulfed everything and everyone. The Emperor's soldiers found his peace in a mercifully brief white-hot death. The heretics ran towards their demons, screaming in terror. The explosion also hit the 2 executioners, consuming the one standing and causing the one on the ground to explode, triggering a second explosion. The 2 knights were called Galaman and Nabatean Glory. However, no one would remember them. Their flames consumed their names, erasing them from history. The Iron Saint, however, did not share their fate. The Imperial rescue forces arrived too late to save their comrades, but they did not return to the surface empty-handed. With them, they carried the helmet of the Iron Saint, which remained untouched by the flames. A relic to be preserved. The legacy of a legend told in the depths. Everyone in the chattel car was thrown forward as the ancient train's braking mechanism shrieked and spit sparks. White flashes flickered through slatted walls, illuminating the compressed mob of humanity held within. The screaming metal was quickly drowned out by a pandemonium of shouting, cursing, grabbing, shoving, and fighting. Darak welcomed the chaos, because it finally gave him a chance to breathe. He was drenched in sweat and filth, most of it not even being his own. He hadn't been able to lie down, sit, or even turn around the entire journey, crushed in from all sides by his fellow condemned. They voided their bladders and bowels where they stood, only able to hope their filth fell through the grated floor. People screamed, puked, and ripped at each other with their teeth as they plunged for hours through complete darkness. The enforcers emptied the labor camp and stuffed as many convicts as possible into every train car. In the bedlam, a few naive fools tried to make a break for freedom. None of them got very far. The enforcers dispatched them in their usual brutal fashion, shoot to wound, drag them into full view of everyone, and then blow their brains out. No one even dared think of escape after that. Preachers bellowed through augmented voice boxes, praising the guards for their efficiency and dedication. They charged every convict present to emulate the enforcers' fervor. It was the only way to earn the God Emperor's forgiveness for their crimes. Crimes, Darak muttered as he was packed into the car. His wife died trying to deliver their child, and her mortal sacrifice wasn't enough to save the babe. It perished before taking its first breath. He went numb to the world around him, unable to feel, hear, or even think. It took many moments before he realized he was being shouted at. The orderlies barely gave him time to wrap her body in a sheet before evicting them from the room. On his way out, staffers mumbled condolences and reminded him to turn the bodies over to the corpse collectors before the next morning shift began. Darak walked to the disposal site as if in a trance, shuffling along in such a stupor he could have been mistaken for a servitor. Yala had been so happy when their procreation request papers had finally been approved by the foundry managers. She ran halfway across the manufactorum to tell him the news. They worked double shifts for 2 weeks afterward, but they both agreed it was worth it. On every break, they'd meet up and try to come up with names. Yala was hoping for a girl to name Navi, after her mother. He had wanted a boy named Dar, after his younger brother. When he finally reached the collection point, he froze in front of the steel chute. He'd heard the rumors all his life about what the corpse collectors did with the dead. Stories like they were used to build servitors or rendered down to make biofuel, or even... Darak began to tremble all over. More than once he'd seen people suddenly go mad during mealtime, when everyone was issued their ration bars. Those nearby whispered it happened when they bit down and found a full fingernail mixed into their food. Everyone who spoke of it disappeared not long afterwards. This would be Darak's first and only act of defiance. He brought his wife and child down the freight elevator to the foundry and cremated them in one of the furnaces there. It was how his people treated their dead before the coming of the Imperium. He wept as he watched them burn to ashes, and when it was all done, he sat on the floor to wait for the enforcers. It didn't take them long. Darak could only thank the God Emperor the deed was finished before they arrived. He was charged with theft, heresy, and unlawful use of foundry property. The sentence was hard labor for the remainder of his life. Darak was blinded when the chattel car doors slammed open and light poured in from outside. Beyond stood enforcers with leveled shotguns, their grim faces partially hidden behind black visors. Preachers held aloft sacred scripture, reciting out loud passages of sacrifice and courage.
Convicts!
A harsh voice echoed up and down the train platform.
Exit your cars and form up in your designated ranks! All laggards and malingerers will be terminated without warning!
The mobs erupted from the cars like pus from a lanced boil, spilling out onto the platform in a tide of filthy bodies. Darak was carried along by the second big push for the doors. A few fights broke out, but the sound of cocking shotguns ended them quickly. He looked back as the last man leaped off the train. The grated floors were streaked with blood and human waste, along with dozens of crumpled bodies. A few were still moving, panting, begging and clawing desperately towards the open air. The enforcers shot them and all the other bodies to be certain they were corpses too. The slatted doors closed, and the train shuddered as it began moving again.
Form up!
The order came down from an elevated podium where an Imperial commissar stood brandishing a bolt pistol.
Assemble in your given rows. Any failure to obey orders will be answered with immediate execution.
Darak quickly placed himself between prisoner 8753 and prisoner 8779, his own number being 8768. 8753 was a grinning lunatic, only ever semi-aware of what was happening around him. 8779 was a hulking ex-ganger, his brutish face scarred from long-removed piercings. As he stood there, Darak became aware of distant gunfire and explosions. The air stank of smoke and burning filth, ashes wafted from above like snow. Only these ice flakes singed as they landed on your skin. All Darak could see in the distance were mountains of ruins, massive slabs of broken rockcrete scorched by fire and pockmarked by war. Below the platform was a swarm of activity. A stream of PDF troops in faded grey uniforms marched towards the sound of battle, while others filed past, burdened by grievously wounded comrades. Armed priests led haggard mobs of civilians carrying ammo crates, ration boxes and water canteens. Seemingly everywhere laid injured people, wailing in anguish and begging passers-by for help. Preachers walked down the rows giving hasty last rites to the dying as their followers stripped them of clothes and valuables.
Children of the God Emperor, hearken to me!
Darak looked up and saw the commissar on the raised podium had been replaced by a confessor wearing soiled robes and a mitre. All the nearby priests raised their voices in an ululating cry, lifting their arms and sacred icons.
You are all sinners!
The prelate began.
Your souls are blackened by your crimes against your fellow man.
He folded his hands into the Imperial Aquila.
Yet the Emperor is a beneficent God. He knows all and sees all. His voice sings through me, and he says unto you, rejoice, for your hour of redemption draws near. Today, you are no longer prisoners, but warriors in the God Emperor's own army. It is your privilege, duty, and honor to join him in his eternal struggle against the foes of humanity. The vile heretics you'll be facing today profane our great Imperium, and their blasphemy cannot be forgiven.
The High Cleric gripped the edges of the podium and roared his benediction with spittle flying from his mouth.
You will kill the enemies of mankind. It is your sacred duty and holy purpose to bring death and destruction to all the Emperor's enemies. Fire your hearts with wrath and hold true to your faith. Obey your officers as you would the Emperor himself. Fear neither pain nor death, and sacrifice without hesitation, and you will earn your place at his side. You will kill the enemies of mankind, or be damned alongside them.
The priests screamed professions of belief and promises of sacrifice. Most of the condemned joined in, but a few remained silent. Darak mumbled along with the hymns he'd known since childhood, but in truth, his faith died with Yala and their child. Best start making some holy noise, Mopey, the ex-ganger murmured, pumping his fists in the air. The priest's little imps are watching. Darak saw them peering around the legs of the enforcers. They were children with shaved heads, wearing oversized robes that basically engulfed their small bodies. They stared with hard, suspicious eyes, and several of them were on him. Clutched in their little fists were talismans, prayer beads, shreds of sacred text, and hand grenades. Darak lifted his arms and joined the tumult. Far down the line, someone was found wanting and dragged forward by foaming priests to be whipped into red pulp.
Now go forth and win your redemption upon the sacred battlefield!
The confessor threw his hands up and closed his eyes in holy rapture.
Shed your blood for the Emperor's higher cause, and I promise paradise awaits you!
The Imperial Commissar gave the order, and the enforcers herded the condemned down toward the trench lines.
Do not fear, my happy chums,
8753 gibbered to everyone around him.
I spoke with the God Emperor last night in my dreams, and he told me his angels were coming to help us today. They'll fall from the sky on fiery wings and wipe out the heretics, just as the Holy Book says.
His announcement was met with angry groans and violent threats if he didn't shut up.
Damn loony,
the ex-ganger grumbled.
every underiver knows that there's no such thing as angels, least of all the emperors. You're smarter than that, ain't you, Mopey?
Darak didn't answer.
Where are these pigs taking us anyway?
8842 asked out loud. He was a squat, ugly murderer, missing an eye and half his teeth.
If they're going to kill us, just be done with it already.
You heard what the churchman said.
8830 barked over her shoulder.
We're going to fight for the God Emperor so he'll forgive our sins.
If that were the case, they'd be giving us weapons.
How else are we supposed to fight the Emperor's enemies?
The bosses barely trust you with a shovel. 8779 laughed. Who'd be stupid enough to put a gun in your grubby mitts? The trenches cut through rockcrete and rubble, becoming narrower and narrower as the noise of battle grew louder and louder. Menacing spools of razor wire rimmed the battlements atop rough-cut walls speckled with blood and human waste. Above their heads, las cannon fire made red streaks through the air. A distant explosion shook the ground, crumbling loose rockcrete and causing men to stumble and fall. The enforcers redoubled their pace, and Darak's group was swiftly ushered down a dark tunnel. They emerged moments later in a crude bunker carved from the rockcrete like a cavern in stone. Braziers made from spent tank shells filled the room with ruddy light and the stink of dirty promethium. The convicts were ordered to sit, and Darak flopped down, panting like a dog. Priests opened their canteens and waded through the masses, pouring water into supplicant mouths and giving blessings. Darak caught as much as he could and savored the feeling of moisture on his sand-dry palate. Not long after the priests finished their rounds, a commotion arose from another tunnel. Out of it came PDF commissars manhandling a hunched figure with an officer's greatcoat draped over his shoulders. The man's face was a rictus of pain, his tortured breath hissing between clenched teeth. His shirt was a ripped, blood-stained ruin, and his hands trembled as they held the coat in place.
Electro-flogging,
the maniac beside Darak whispered.
I'd know one of those faces anywhere. It was on so many of my friends as they died screaming in the guardhouse. Their dying was long and hard, but they're with the Emperor now.
He grinned, a mouthful of brown and black teeth.
Lucky them, huh?
His raspy cackle was like crumpling paper. One of the commissars unfurled a scroll and read aloud.
Former Captain Sorver of B Company 2nd Battalion, you have failed in your duties to the Emperor. You defrauded the troops under your command and stole Medicaid supplies to sell to known insurgent groups. By order of General Kalloch, your penance for these transgressions will be to lead the next forlorn hope into the enemy lines. Pray your death is swift and glorious.
A younger commissar began handing the captain his sword and auto pistol, but was stopped.
No!
The one with the scroll snapped.
A sword is too noble a weapon for this coward's hand. Give him his pistol. Any filth can shoot a gun.
He looked over at Darak and the convicts.
Well, maybe not this filth.
The commissars all smiled and chuckled darkly. The pistol was shoved through the captain's belt and a flask pressed into his hand. The head commissar rolled up the scroll, stuffed it back into his jacket and checked a timepiece.
The next bombardment will start in 155 seconds. Have this scum upon the battlefields and ready to charge the moment the artillery stops. Then it's over the top and forward, with only victory ahead and barrier troops behind.
He leaned into the condemned man's face.
Is that understood?
A solemn nod was all he could manage, and the commissars left. The captain pushed his arms through his coat sleeves with great effort, then pulled a rumpled officer's cap from a pocket and placed it on his head. The insignia on the coat and hat had been ripped off, leaving only bare patches and loose threads behind. He took a hefty swig from the flask before tucking it away and drew his gun with a racking sigh. Sorver looked at his new charges with a mix of loathing and grim acceptance.
On me,
he growled, then turned toward the front of the bunker.
For the Emperor and all his great works.
The enforcers barked their time-worn threats, and every convict was on their feet, filing after the captain. The priests followed suit, but the guards remained behind. Just beyond the bunker was a bowl-shaped depression, ringed with sandbags, razor wire and machine gun emplacements. There were soldiers loitering about as well, but they were not in shabby PDF uniforms. They were dressed like the Imperial guardsmen Darrak had seen on holoreels that played constantly in the break rooms. He recognized the helmets, flak armor and lasguns first, but when the rest of them came into focus, he almost cried out in shock. These men were like no one Darrak had ever seen before. They had wide, round faces, with icy-colored eyes and strange red tattoos covering their cheeks and chins. Small bronze medallions dangled from noses sheathed in dull green stones, and flint blades hung on leather thongs about their necks. Their broad, cynical smiles were made more unsettling by glyphs cut into their brilliantly white teeth. Darrak gaped, but was quickly pushed along by a priest.
"Pay them no mind, penitent,"
the priest said.
"They're here to do the Emperor's work, same as us."
"Father, I don't have a weapon,"
Darrak blurted in sudden panic.
"I have no more martyr vests,"
he responded matter-of-factly.
"You must trust in the Emperor now more than you've ever done before, and face his enemies with the fearlessness of one destined for sainthood."
Darrak stared incomprehensibly, but then heard a shout from a nearby guardsman. He swaggered towards him with a grin stretching across his grotesque face.
Here,
He spoke in a harsh accent.
weapon for you.
The guard pressed something into his hand. Darrak looked down. It was a chunk of rockcrete. They all spit laughter at the convicts before taking up their positions behind the machine guns. Darrak's heart pounded like a drum trapped in his ribcage. His bowels felt weak, and his legs trembled uncontrollably. The condemned mounted short ladders made from scavenged rebar and huddled against the foremost barricades. The stench of burnt flesh saturated the air like a miasma. Peeking over the sandbags, Darrak saw corpses tangled in the razor wire, their bodies ripped apart by close-range gunfire. The ex-captain hunkered down next to Darrak, his eyes leery from the contents of his flask. There was a distant howling that quickly grew into a shrieking horror, and Darrak clapped his hands over his ears just as the explosions began. Shock waves pummeled him like invisible fists, and he pressed his hands harder and harder until he screamed. Everyone else was screaming too, but no human-made noise could compete with such wanton destruction. Seconds became hours, and just as it seemed it would go on forever, it all stopped.
"This is it!"
Sorva shouted and threw his head back, emptying the flask down his throat. He raised his pistol and pointed it forward.
"Over the top, everyone! Over the top now! Go! 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 For the Emperor!"
The priests were the first over the sandbags. They held up their holy Aquila scepters and began singing the hymns of battle. Animalistic screams rose with the convicts as they hurled themselves over the battlements with the frenzy of livestock before the slaughter. Darrak didn't know what to do, what to think. He just ran.
"I'm free! I'm free!"
Screamed 8753, throwing up his arms.
"Emperor, please! Take me now!"
Everyone else was unable to articulate anything beyond primal bellows or heathen curses. They charged through walls of smoke and ankle-deep drifts of greasy, vile-smelling ashes that clung like hot tar. Darrak felt things crack and crumble under his foot. Looking down, he saw they were running over a carpet of charred human remains. A sickening cackle welled up from his guts, and then a man ahead of him exploded in a shower of blood and body parts. Something hissed through the air next to Darrak's head, and a great torrent of light blotted his vision. Horrific shrieks erupted from all around, and a glowing red-hot spear stabbed him through his right elbow. Darrak screamed, twisted and fell, his feet giving out from under him. Groaning in agony and blind with panic, he just started rolling and rolling until he ran into something solid. Darrak opened his eyes. There was a slab of blackened rockcrete just large enough to be used for cover. He tucked himself behind it, oblivious to the missing lower half of his arm. The shooting never let up for a moment. People wailed, running in all directions, thoughtless with terror. Darrak saw the ex-ganger stumble past, sobbing like a frightened child, moments before he was bisected by a burst of machine gun fire. Something heavy flopped down next to Darrak, reeking of alcohol. It was Sorva. He looked at Darrak hiding on the ground, and all Darrak could do was look back. The ex-captain's eyes narrowed in judgment, and he raised his pistol to Darak's forehead. But in that same motion, the top half of his skull was blown away. Darak laughed and cried as all semblance of sanity fled his tortured mind. He stood in a fit of madness, and a wall of orange light rushed towards him in an instant. In the haze of the oncoming fire, Darak could swear he saw the silhouette of a woman holding a child.
Yala,
Darak muttered, then was torn to pieces by a final salvo from the starving, desperate wretches he'd been sent to destroy. Darak's body was trampled under a mass charge of PDF troops, followed by the Imperial Guard, who mopped up what resistance was left. They claimed victory in the name of Lord General Kalak, the savior of Hyksos. The cowled Magister waited impatiently as the guard servitor processed his identity. It stared forward, dead and expressionless, humming and twitching until the process was complete. Past the servitor was the personal chamber of the planetary governor of Hyksos and the overlord of High Vavaris, Shadashor Manetho Goshen. The governor was entertaining several high-ranking nobles from the uppermost spires of the hive. They stood along the edges of a deep pit, laughing, eating, drinking and shouting wages at the spectacle below them. Servo skulls hovered to and fro, carrying platters of meat and fruit, and pitchers of rich, red wine. Lord Goshen was reclined in his maglev throne, gazing into the pit obsessively while gnawing the last morsels of meat off a bone. His legs dangled limply over the front of his chair and danced obscenely every time he tittered. When the Magister got closer, he saw the source of his master's fixation. In the pit was some vile Xenos beast that resembled a mass of writhing arm-sized earthworms. Circling it were 3 naked children slashing at it with knives.
My lord,
The Magister uttered.
I have a report from the front line in Manufactorum District 100.
The what?
The governor mumbled and reluctantly tore his attention away from the pit. He swiveled his throne around to face the Magister. Lord Goshen's body was withered and malformed by centuries of arranged marriages among the highborn of Hyksos. Around his neck was an augmented life support collar, bristling with tubes and cables connecting into his throne. Above the collar was an obese face with small, close-set eyes, an upturned nose and no chin whatsoever. A stringy beard partially covered his goitered jowls, and grease glistened on his painted lips as he licked his fingers.
The insurrection, my lord. General Kalak is pleased to report the last of the rebel holdfasts has fallen, thanks to the heroic actions of the 903rd Zibalban Regiment. He can now begin the liquidation of Hab Districts 18 through 74, but requests the Zibalbans be given official sanction to sack 2 Hab districts to take personal spoils as reward for their bravery. Well, I can't see why not. Those filthy menials must be made examples of, so no one will whisper the word rebellion for 100 years, let alone riot over stupid things like food and clean water. Indeed, Lord Governor.
The Magister bowed.
The General's tally officers claim casualties were minimal, in the low millions, not counting the liquidations to come, that is. Yes.
The governor waved his skeletal hand dismissively.
Be sure General Kalak uses the nerve agent I sent him. It's what worked the quickest last time these ingrates rose up. And yes, I know it'll cause a dip in productivity. Don't even start with that. Just have the necessary bribe set aside for the blood-sucking tithe collectors when they come. Those stinking plebs breed like vermin when I allow it. So we'll have the Manufactorum running at full capacity within the next decade or so.
A high-pitched scream echoed from the pit, and the nobles all roared with amusement and slapped each other on the back. Lord Goshen turned, then looked back with a petulant scowl.
Damn you and damn your pointless prattle. You're ruining my sport. I want no more you today. In the name of the God Emperor, just go away.
For the Emperor and his higher cause. The Magister bowed again and left the room as another shriek rose from the pit.
Jarrett sees Vostroyan through a gap in the slow-moving blanket of fog. 20 yards away, his old friend leans out from behind the pitted rock of a lichen-covered headstone. His face is a pale, shivering contrast against the dark grey PDF helmet jammed tight on his head. Voss sees him looking and winks. Jarrett nods and wipes sweat away from his face. They are not alone. Muffled grumbles and the shifting of chilly feet tells Jarrett that the rest of the company is still there, unseen but somewhere close. Some of them are making themselves comfortable, attested to by the rattling of equipment, though he thinks they're wasting their time. Chances are, orders from above will move them someplace else soon enough. Their advance during the pre-dawn hours had been rapid and unopposed, a hasty plug fitted to fill a late-realized gap in Imperial lines. Now deployed in amongst the towering gravestones and sepulchres of the city's great and good, their company is part of the secondary defense line behind the las cannon and stubber teams at the cemetery wall. Fog rising from the river beyond the cemetery wall smothers conversation and chills the bones. By the time darkness becomes grey light, each of them is damp and miserable. Yet their success is relative. Though there has been no sight of the enemy, there has also not been any sign of reinforcements moving up to support them. Jarrett knows enough to realize it is a fragile balance. The firing lines were now obscured, and nothing but the call of birds rises from the far side of the wall, thin, reedy and hidden. They wait, and they listen. The fog steals meaning from time, stretching it out so that the minutes feel like hours. Lamps flare, the muted glow looking like fairy lights from old stories. The officers extinguish them as soon as their usefulness is done. Sounds are flat and dislocated, pounced on at first as harbingers of imminent attack. Over time, the men dismiss them as meaningless noise. Jarrett shifts position and brushes at the grass surrounding the headstone. Despite the cold, his tunic is soaked with sweat beneath his armor, and the dampness makes him acutely aware of the gaps between the flak plates. There are cries in the mist now, occasionally at first, mixed in with guttural shouts, and, Throne help them, answering screams. They have all seen the grainy pics of green-skinned giants with red eyes and clawed hands, Xenos set upon only the kill. For weeks, the planet-wide information networks have plaintively asked, "Why us?" into the wide blue of the sky, and received no answer. At least, no answer that men shivering in the shadow of other long-dead men can fathom. His knuckles grow white on the lasgun, while around him expressions become taut as jaws clench and eyes widen. They know what is coming. Voss raises his hand, his fist clenched. Jarrett responds in kind, though he feels none of the bravado the action represents. When the mist moves sluggishly aside, he can see the sheen of sweat on his friend's face. There are whispers now among the sergeants as information is passed along from captain to lieutenant and down the ranks. Orders are relayed, and confirmations are sought. Then, in their section as in others, the officers look up, as if they can see the arced trajectory of lobbed munitions.
Incoming!
Whistles then, faint until screamingly loud. Men duck down, crouching behind anything bigger than they are, behind anything at all. Concussions rock the ground, dirt and debris are kicked up and flung into the sky. The artillery is their own, but none of them trust the gunnery sergeants at that moment. The impacts reverberate, jarring teeth and shredding nerves. The noise is beyond anything they have ever heard. Tinnitus comes in its wake. They pray to the god Emperor that what lands on them is only dirt, but there are splashes of wetness too, and the men further back hear close screams as a shell lands short and a section of the wall disappears into dust, along with the squad stationed there. Shouts for medics ring out, and answering them come roars from beyond the wall. Men scramble forward and rush back. Screams pick at the nerves as the wounded receive attention. The barrage stops. They rise from the ground, brushing at the dirt, checking weapons and each other. The shells might have delayed the orcs, but that is all they will do. The artillery does not speak again. Perhaps the Imperial commanders realized the Xenos were too close to the PDF lines for an effective bombardment. Perhaps that brief roar of defiance was all they could muster.
Eyes front, you lot! Eyes front! Pick your targets!
The call comes from a sergeant threading his way through their section. The mantra gets repeated along the line, echoing strangely among the gravestones and fog.
Pick your targets,
says Voss. His grin is sickly.
He's frickin' joking, isn't he? Can't see my hand in front of my face here.
The sergeant doesn't pause as he delivers his reprimand.
Shut up! Watch the front!
Jarrett forces a tight smile. A thought strikes him, now of all times. He is only called Voss by the abbreviated part of his surname for all the time they have known each other. Now he thinks of it. He can't recall ever having used his friend's given name. Sounds again, like 1,000 drumbeats forming a singular whole. In amongst them, only heard when the marching feet miss a beat, comes what sounds like laughter. The noise becomes oppressive without visual confirmation. Auspex readings return trailing ghost images like visible winds, adding to the disorientation they all feel. None of them knows if the enemy is behind them or in front of them. Someone says exactly that and gets silenced by a muffled thump. Better that than have a commissar identify who said it. Jarrett fits the stock of his weapon into his shoulder and holds his finger away from the trigger as he has been taught. He leans across the weapon and stares at his hand for long moments, willing it to stop trembling. An enveloping quiet descends across the Imperial lines, interrupted by an occasional cough somewhere deep in the fog. Jarrett realizes he has been holding his breath, but now doesn't want to let go of it, fearful of being the first to break the silence, the first to draw attention to himself. For a moment, that is it. Hushed anticipation, silent fear, and then, from beyond the wall, a blaring cacophony of rage given voice as thousands of orcs roar together. The sound rumbles over the Imperial lines like a physical blow, making them cower closer to the earth, as if seeking safety down amongst those already dead. Jarrett and Voss look at each other, mute. Then the guns open up. The first orcs charge the perimeter, shouting wordless battle cries. Stubbers blaze and lasgun flashes illuminate the mist. Shooters rattle in answer. Chunks of stone explode from the perimeter wall and the slanted headstones behind. The men in the secondary line duck in response to the gunfire, then glance around their barricades. Directly in front of Jarrett's section, 2 men at the wall crumple backwards. An explosion tears a hole through the stone, and he sees the first of the orcs. It is huge. A looming nightmare partly hidden by fog and lit by the intermittent flash of lasbeams. Filthy, its skin an indistinct greenish-grey in the muted light, it charges forward. The yellow of its tusks and the rust of its crude armor is forgotten as the reality of it fills his sight. The cleaver it hefts in its hand is unsophisticated, but when it crushes the chest of a trooper scrambling out of its way, it is deathly effective. It bellows wordless hate and sprays bullets over the wall, straight into the second line of the Imperial defense. Another man goes down, felled by the last of the orcs' ammunition.
Move your asses!
The sergeant stands over them, and they scramble up, filling the air with shafts of searing light. 3 ruby-red beams transfix the orc, and as it staggers backwards, they fire again. Not every shot hits. The orc doesn't fall. It rights itself and comes at them again, frothing blood between its teeth that looks black in the dim light. Only the sergeant isn't panicking now. There isn't any blood from the alien's wounds. Jarrett realizes dimly that the lasbeams have cauterized the injuries they have inflicted. The thought seems to come from outside his head, as if someone else is having it. He moves. He reacts. He fires his weapon. But at the same time, none of it is him. The orc is through the hole in the wall, rearing up before him. It shoves Voss aside with the blistered stump of an arm. He falls and his helmet tumbles away into the fog. Jarrett slumps backwards against a headstone, panic firing upwards. The discharge sears away half of the orc's face. Time lengthens as an alien eye boils in its socket, shedding steam. The sergeant charges the creature, impaling it with a bayonet affixed to the end of his lasgun. The weapon sticks in the Xenos flesh, and the sergeant squeezes the trigger. Before he can pull the weapon back, the orc brings its cleaver down on the man's head. Though the blow is deflected by the curve of his helmet, his neck breaks and the cleaver slices into his shoulder, separating it and his arm from his body. He falls without a sound, a marionette with its strings cut. But it is enough. Even orcs can only take so much punishment. The creature topples forward, pinning Jarrett to the ground. He can't breathe. The alien's face is beside his own, a leering and gap-toothed thing from the darkest corners of his imagination. Its remaining eyes still open, and Jarrett imagines it isn't dead, but resting, just gathering itself for a few moments before lurching forward to tear his face off with those fetid tusks. He begins to scream. The orcs are at the perimeter no longer in ones and twos, but in squad strength. The Imperial firing line of the cemetery wall stands to meet them, holds for a minute, then buckles under the weight of the attackers and disintegrates. The secondary line comes under immediate pressure. Las beams crackle, stubbers clatter, and nothing can be heard beyond the din of combat. Shouts, screams, battle cries, the thump of explosions. Smoke drifts in amongst the gravestones and mixes with the fog to create a thick atmosphere of discharge. Jarrett's voice has gone, and his cries have become tiny whimpers in the back of his throat. He struggles beneath the fallen alien, wriggling and pushing and twisting until he can get the weight of it off him. For a second or two he simply lies in the dirt. The sensations are overwhelming. He can't breathe. His hearing is dulled. Every sound is felt as a low concussion in his bones. Flashes of light that leave shaded after images. The stench of blood and shit and smoke and foul things he can't put a name to. He rises and stumbles, jarring his knee against something large and heavy on the ground. He can't make out what the lump is, but he thinks it might be another dead alien. He feels only numbness. Jarrett turns and staggers back into the broken PDF lines, flinching at sudden noises, wondering where his weapon is. The orcs are in amongst them now, their momentum carving a bloody swathe, and all is a confusing mass of oral and visionary sensation, too quick for his mind to process. The fog is an apparition-filled nightmare, a disorientating place of half-seen tombstones and creatures intent on sending him to join the corpses interred there. He leans against a gravestone, his heart hammering faster than he's ever known. Nowhere is safe. Voss appears like a bloodied apparition out of the smoke and fog. His uniform is filthy, though he still has his mud-splattered lasgun. He looks at Jarrett without recognition before turning and shooting blindly in the direction of the enemy. His lips are drawn back and he snarls at nothing, firing at movement and shadows as if possessed. Jarrett is knocked to the ground by something heavy, rising over his prone form like the encroaching shadow of death itself. His ribs have given way, but he still manages a scream from somewhere deep and feral inside him. Voss is there then, still firing, hitting nothing. The orc swipes him nearly in two with something large and heavy and already covered in some other poor bastard's innards. Voss flops to the ground, arterial blood pumping into the grass. Jarrett swears that for a moment, even mostly bisected, he can still see life in his friend's eyes. He feels wetness in his groin and the creature roars. His last conscious act before his mind retreats is to scramble to his feet and run, through wisps of slowly evaporating fog and thicker tendrils of smoke, until his legs give out and he collapses. They find him in a shallow foxhole, behind a slab of masonry that has been blown from the side of a building by artillery fire. Rough hands drag him out of the shadows and haul him to his feet. He does not resist. The lieutenant leading them speaks to him, but Jarrett can't understand what he is saying, can't think fast enough to form a response. He stares slack-mouthed until the man shakes his head and walks away. A yellowish glow of daylight fills a sky of sullen clouds. It is quiet now, the dull crump of munitions sparse and distant. Men move back and forth across a broken urban landscape, intent on individual tasks. Jarrett doesn't know where they are in the city, but it is nowhere near the cemetery. The soldiers march him past the shattered ruins of hab units and warehouses. He stumbles often, but they didn't seem to mind. The road they walk is uneven, covered in debris from gutted buildings. Jarrett looks at them without emotion. He looks at the soldiers escorting him in the same way. Dressed the same as he is, they wear hollowed-out expressions, their faces pale beneath the dirt. They are the same as billions of others, all along the length and breadth of the Imperium. Conscripts, wrenched from their everyday existence, handed a lasgun and shoved into the furnace of mankind's eternal wars. Their walk ends when the street widens into a small plaza surrounded by low buildings. Windows empty of glass stare down at them like accusers, tracking the guilty as the small party reaches the center of the space.
"Another traitor comes,"
says a voice. Jarrett looks up from his feet and tries to rise above the fugue in his mind. The man speaking wears a high-collared leather coat, shiny black as if it has passed under a shower. His hair, drawn back from his forehead and wetted down, looks like a ribbed oil slick sweeping across his scalp. His expression is as pale and grim as those of the men half dragging Jarrett behind them. Beyond the commissar, two men stand against wooden posts, driven through flagstones, their hands tied behind them. Other posts beside the men are empty. A hand in his back shoves Jarrett past the officer towards them.
"Cowardice is treachery,"
the commissar says, addressing a group of a dozen soldiers standing in front of the posts.
"Running from the Emperor's enemies is as good as joining them. Why? Because the traitor reveals his hand at the exact moment most likely to cause harm to the defenders of the Imperium. Can you tell me how that is different from cowardice?"
The soldiers are silent. They are as numbed as he is. The ones alongside Jarrett ignore the officer and concentrate on tying his hands to a post.
"Just so,"
says the commissar.
"It is not. And if we give death to traitors, should we not also give death to cowards? These men have damned themselves by their actions, malingering, turning tail before the enemies of mankind. They are not fit to serve the glorious name of the Emperor."
The voice ceases to make sense to Jarrett. What did the commissar mean? Who was he talking about? He wants to tell the officer that this is a mistake, that he shouldn't be here, that he is only a driver of a mass transit vehicle in a minor city half a continent away, and this has nothing to do with him. The man next to him cries out, shouting at the officer, into an elbow across the face silences him and he slumps forward. That draws a response from the other man, who begins to shout obscenities, cursing the commissar, the Imperium, the greenskins and everything else under the starved yellow sun of the world. A soldier puts the butt of his stub gun into the man's midriff and he falls against his restraints, coughing and weeping. A soldier approaches them. In his hands he holds 3 slips of white vellum. He pins one to Jarrett's chest but won't meet his eyes. The action is repeated with the next prisoner, and the next. Jarrett stares around, uncomprehending. What was going on? It isn't until the rest of the soldiers step forward and raise their guns that it begins to dawn on him what is happening. Even then, the realization is so slow in making its way through his stupefied mind that he never really comprehends what it is. That in itself is something of a mercy. Jarrett thinks of 1,000 things in those last moments. Snippets of a life that whirled past at the speed of light, of his mother and father, kissing a girl for the first time, when he cheated on his entrance exams for the city transportation department, his bashful pride at putting on a PDF uniform, his oldest friend split like an autumn log by a roaring alien. He looks to the sky, blinking in the light and hoping there might be a last sliver of blue to hold on to, but there is nothing but grey clouds and a pale yellow sun somewhere above them that can't break through. There is a barked command from the commissar. The soldiers take aim. Another command. Jarrett never hears the final crack as the stub guns fire.
Godwin was not accustomed to queuing. Despite decades of discipline instilled in him by the Schola Progenium, he was beginning to lose his patience. The line of pilgrims meandered through the vast square, snaking through the ramshackle tents and stalls that had sprung up to sell their wares. Most were false charms and trinkets designed to ensnare the ignorant. Sacred stones, the blood of martyrs. But common also were imported recaf vendors, helping supplicants to remain standing in the bitter cold. On a day such as this, the most sacred holy day of this benighted world, they did a roaring trade among the hapless masses.
This was Ardentecost, celebrated as the longest day on this frozen world, when the bleak light of their distant star shined the strongest, and for its subjects, marked the day of the God Emperor's ascension beyond mortal sight. Godwin marveled at the malleability of the Imperial cult, its endless capacity to graft itself onto and co-opt local ritual and ceremony, indefatigable in its binding grip on humanity. And yet, in that strength lay great danger, as Godwin knew only too well.
Has your brain frozen as well as your boots?
A voice sounded in his ear.
You were meant to report 5 minutes ago. And my situation is much unchanged since last we spoke,
said Godwin.
I am still within sight of the cathedral, and estimate I won't gain ingress for another 3 hours. I don't like this, Godwin. This is the center of ecclesiastical authority in the Hive, fully warded and shielded. We have no idea what's inside beyond rumors of an esoteric Holy Day ritual, and you're going in alone. Do I have to remind you that Inquisitor Rathenau gave me full operational authority to investigate heresy on this planet? If this ritual is tainted, the corruption may already have spread far. We must act decisively.
Godwin heard a sigh through his Vox bead.
Just try not to cause a diplomatic incident with the Ministorum.
Godwin smirked.
And remember, once inside, you're on your own.
He entered the cathedral through heavy obsidian doors, beneath the somber gaze of looming stone effigies of the faithful, and was immediately enveloped in oppressing darkness. As his eyes adjusted to the meager light within, he beheld the expanse of vaulted stone. He heard the gasps of those around him as they were overcome with awe, as Godwin would also have been if he had not seen such things 1,000 times or more. The message was transparent to him. You are insignificant, a mote in the face of the universe, and yet you can have a place here, in his grand design, if you but obey. However, Godwin had never seen what now lay before him. It was a shallow, elongated pool that stretched into the western nave. It stank of perfume and purifying salts, bubbling mildly where filtration systems cycled the water. The line of pilgrims continued its march through the pool. Godwin observed those around him and did as they did, not wanting to reveal his ignorance. He removed his boots and socks before discarding them on one of the piles to either side of the procession. Godwin considered the implications of the act. On an ice-bound mining world such as this, a pair of good boots might easily be the difference between life and death, the surrendering of which represented significant dedication. Every supplicant was now united in that commitment, previous affiliations and rivalries overridden, at least temporarily. Again, Godwin couldn't help but admire the cunning of the ecclesiarchy. At the edge of the pool, he bent down and surreptitiously dipped his finger into the water. It was warm and inviting, and the digital device concealed in his finger revealed that it contained no toxins beyond the expected microcontaminants in any hive. At least, none that it could detect. Feeling strangely vulnerable, he stepped into the water and began walking. Nevertheless, after standing in the square all day, the caress of warm water against his feet and calves felt like floating in low G, and despite himself, he began to relax. As he approached the end of the pool, he noticed a young attendant girl watching him. Inwardly, he chided his lapse of vigilance. How long had she been standing there? As he stepped from the pool, the girl bent down without a word and began drying his feet with a small flannel. Bewildered, Godwin glanced around, but no one was acting as if anything was amiss. She rose slowly, before speaking.
Happy Ardentecost, my lord. His Eminence, Archbishop Wareham, humbly requests your presence.
So much for undercover, he thought bitterly. A feeling that intensified when he realized that despite knowing what he was, they'd allowed him to wait in line like common hive trash.
By all means,
Godwin growled. The girl turned and walked away, and it dawned on him that whether Chaos Cabal or Gene Stealer cult, he had no idea what he was walking into. He followed, after only a moment's hesitation, reciting a litany of fortitude even as the cold flagstones sucked the warmth from his naked feet. He was surprised when the girl led him to a frozen courtyard ringed by an ancient, cracked colonnade. The arches were covered in jagged icicles, which, Godwin thought, could easily be used as weapons in a pinch. As he approached, he spotted a crowd that looked even more wretched than the procession of pilgrims. Their eyes were sunken and hollow, and many had nothing but bundles of rags wrapped around their feet. The Archbishop was among them, apparently leading a group of clergy and handing out bread. He was an old, unassuming man dressed in plain vestments, who addressed Godwin as he approached.
Do you know why we give alms to the poor on holy days?
Nonplussed, Godwin realized the Archbishop expected a response.
Every human has a place within the Emperor's divine order.
Indeed,
said Wareham, as he turned to look at Godwin.
Ah, fresh from the scholar, I presume.
Before Godwin could respond, he turned to one of his attendants. It was clear from her physique that she was a bodyguard of some kind, possibly from the Adeptus Sororitas. She glared at Godwin unblinkingly.
If you could take over here, Sister Aisha, I believe our guest wants to see the labyrinth. Come, let us walk.
Godwin felt the sister's gaze on his back as they re-entered the cathedral, although he was surprised that the Archbishop would apparently leave himself defenseless in her absence. The situation was not playing out how he had expected, and thrown, his feet were cold.
You evaded the why of the matter in your response, said Wareham. Every human has a place, a use, one which we condition and reinforce. The provision of alms creates dependence. We provide not only the physical, but the spiritual nourishment they need to survive, as do all our holy day rituals. They crave a narrative, a reason to suffer, or they cannot be controlled in their despair. I trust you understand this. They will do anything to protect their rituals.
He paused, and then continued in High Gothic.
Priests and laymen, governors and servants, fathers and children, and everyone have need of ritual, so that in all things is to be lauded and praised the goodly order of He, without which no Hab, hive, nor the Imperium itself can continue and endure.
Save your catechisms for your flock, old man. What is the labyrinth?
The Archbishop came to a halt and extended his arm, gesturing at the floor. Carved into the ancient flagstones and surrounded by dripping candles lay a geometric pavement bound within the confines of a perfect circle. At first, Godwin thought it was a maze, but he noticed there were no junctions or dead ends. There was only one path, wide enough to walk. A path of twists and turns that meandered repeatedly toward the center and then back to the edge, winding in on itself before releasing in a bewildering dance of symmetry. And at the center, upon a simple wooden stool, lay a black box. As an acolyte of the Ordo Hereticus, Godwin knew the aesthetic of sorcery when he saw it. He was aghast to find it put on display so brazenly.
This is highly unusual, Archbishop. Explain.
This is the beating heart of our cathedral. Indeed, the structure was built to reflect and amplify the power of its sacred geometry. If the east facade were laid upon the floor, the center of the east window would perfectly correspond with the center. You see the indentations around the circumference. They correspond with the days in our solar cycle. We teach that on this holy day, the light of our divine emperor passes through the cathedral and into the labyrinth, filling it with grace.
And what about the box?
The reliquary contains the skull of St. Eustace. It is said that when he walked among the living, he melted the ground where he walked and brought warmth to the faithful. His remains form a conduit from which we teach the Emperor's light is transmitted. If the pilgrim is worthy, they will witness it upon reaching the center. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to stand abreast with the divine and perhaps even experience a miracle.
And you believe what you preach, Archbishop?
I believe in the power of the God Emperor, just as you do, though I advise you take heed of my previous words which you so callously dismissed.
I've had enough of this, said Godwin, taking a step toward the box.
The crowd of onlooking pilgrims gasped, a moment before Wareham stopped him in his tracks with an outstretched hand. Godwin was stunned, both at the firmness of his grip and the fact that he would dare do such a thing.
You cannot cross the boundary of the labyrinth on Odentacost. To do so will break the circuit of divine energy. All its blessings, past and present, will be lost. You would invite ruination upon everyone here, and yourself most of all.
You forget yourself, priest. To deny my authority would be most unwise.
I do no such thing. If you wish, you may walk the labyrinth yourself.
Godwin considered the offer. It could be a trap, but there were innumerable witnesses, and this was precisely what he had been trained for. So be it. The Archbishop flung his arms wide and addressed the docile crowd in a booming voice that belied his apparent frailty.
This is the center of our cathedral. This is the sacrament that we receive on our most holy of days. This is the destination of your pilgrimage, and it has chosen its next witness.
He gestured to Godwin.
This man is an outsider of great import who has traveled far to experience that which we hold most dear. Join with me, brothers and sisters, in welcoming him into the fold.
Godwin approached the entrance, noticing an inscription carved into the ground. Only the penitent man will pass. Only the penitent man may leave. Godwin crossed the threshold and began to walk. As he did so, the servo choir in the nearby chantry raised their voices, filling the cathedral with their sonorous mantras and exhortations. Godwin became suddenly aware of his breath and the sensation of his bare feet upon the stone. He willingly embraced the reverent atmosphere, knowing that the Emperor was with him, false ritual or no, but kept his mind alert to any unnatural variation in conscious experience. Upon finally reaching the center, he carefully approached the reliquary of St. Eustace. He stared into the box. Dead, empty sockets stared back, and he felt nothing. Nothing at all. There was no dilution in the fabric of reality, no foul taint of chaos, and nor was there any swell of revelation. Why hadn't he felt anything? He felt a twinge of consternation. If there were something to experience, surely he, of all the Emperor's servants, would have experienced it. Unless, of course, the relic was false. Frustration turned to fury as he realized the Archbishop was lying to loyal Imperial subjects, which was crime enough, but worse than that. Such willful dishonesty was a flaw that the primordial powers might easily exploit. It may not be tainted today, but it was only a matter of time. His duty was clear. From her hidden alcove, Sister Aisha watched the inquisitorial acolyte thread his way back through the labyrinth. One did not need witch sight to know his thoughts. Even so, despite him being shielded by potent psychic wards and devices, she could taste the peripheral aura of his mind. She was unsurprised to find it simmering with resentment and self-righteous fury.
You must see it, sister,
whispered Wareham through the Vox bead in her ear.
The turmoil in his mind is palpable. Is it not as I said? In his arrogance, he sees heresy in every shadow. If we do not act now, our lives will surely be forfeit. Do it now, for all our sakes.
At once, Your Eminence, said Aisha, as she inhaled slowly, relaxing the muscles around her eyes as she focused her mind into a single confluence of purpose. She exhaled, releasing a lance of psychic energy at the inquisitorial agent. The invisible attack rebounded from Godwin's formidable defenses, dissipating harmlessly into the frigid air, but it was enough. The kinetic force of the blow caused him to stumble, and he fell onto one knee, inadvertently crossing the boundary of the labyrinth. An eerie, total silence fell upon the cathedral then, spreading from man to woman as the realization of what they'd seen fell upon them all. Yet no immaterial doom engulfed Godwin as Wareham had foretold. More lies, he thought.
as he rounded on the Archbishop and drew a hidden blade.
Where is your witch, heretic?
He spat. Few heard him, however, as his voice was drowned out by the rising tumult. He turned, horrified, to see a mob of crazed, barefoot pilgrims bearing down on him as they rushed to defend their Archbishop and avenge the desecration of their most sacred holy day ritual. He lashed out, killing several with expertly placed thrusts as he tried to extricate himself from the seething mass of bodies, but it only incensed them further. Wareham's catechism echoed through his mind as they bore him to the ground. His screams echoed through the cathedral's chambers long moments after they ended. They dragged Godwin's ruined corpse across the ancient flagstones and away from the labyrinth, leaving a smear of blood and viscera in its wake, before heaving the body into the perfumed pool. Blood mixed and moved with the eddies in the water as the filters began to purify the polluted liquid, bubbling mildly. His first face belongs to a child. Ashen white skin taut against pinched cheeks and hunger-pang ribs. He's cold. He wants to get warm. There's no more reason to it than that. The other children scream as he drives a pair of scissors into Sister Charity's jugular. He is weak, much weaker than he will become. The scissors puncture skin, but not the thick cartilage of trachea, and he stabs the nun half a dozen more times before she falls with a gargled splutter. He leaps onto her body, plunging the bloody scissors again and again into her neck. The blood splatters across his face. It feels sticky. It feels warm. He takes his second face in that moment. It still possesses the features of a child, but the pale drawn skin has become crimson red and dripping. Drip, drip, dripping to the rhythm of his panting breath. The other children scream, but they don't flee, frozen in their terror. He falls upon them with the scissors, emptying their bodies until the blankets of blood swaddle him from his head to his feet. Then there is pain, a blossoming agony across the stomach, and he falls, clutching at a gunshot wound. He barely remembers the interrogations that follow, but he remembers telling them that he had been cold, that he had wanted to get warm. The grim-faced warden never seems to believe him. They keep asking the same questions, waiting for a different answer. It all changes when the boy sees his reflection in a metal cup. He howls like an animal. They have removed his second face with water and soap, and he no longer recognizes what he sees. Terrified by his own mutilation, he rams the metal cup into the warden's face, lacerating their cornea with the sharp edge of its rim. As the warden bellows in pain, the boy clamps his teeth on their neck and rips out their throat. He feels the blood cascade across him. He feels as his face returns to him, and then unconsciousness returns as well, in the form of cracking blows against the back of his skull. The next few years are remembered in spasmed fits of half-grasped memory. His body is racked by the violent cocktail of a madman's science, his blood replaced with raging chemicals and his innards swapped out with foreign organs. When he tries to eat, he vomits, its expulsions fizzing and burning against the bubbling metal of the grated floor. Sometimes he becomes explosively angry and breaks the bones in his hands against whatever surface is nearby. As his body changes, instructors with shadows for faces tutor him alongside other children. He learns how human beings can be disassembled with a few cuts of a sword and where they can be emptied with a single thrust. He learns where to find the blood vessels that carry poison to a human's heart. He learns how to withstand relentless pain and how to function with bruises and fractured bones. He learns how to make a dozen tactical decisions in 1/10 of a second. He learns how to disappear into darkness and stare out from the black. He learns how to use the lethality of his refashioned body. His training is practical, tactile. The instructors allow him to apply his learning in the testing yard, and he almost cries in joy when he rediscovers his face in the steaming guts of another child. He is so ecstatic that he tries to kill one of the instructors, and even though they collapse his throat with a single punch, they seemed pleased. As he runs out of breath and his vision dims, he scratches his nails along the instructor's radial artery and splits it open to the warm rush of pumping blood. When he awakes in the Medicae bay, he dislocates his thumbs to escape his restraints. He kills half the medical staff before he is brought down by shock truncheons and gas bombs. In the last year, there are only 2 pupils left. No longer boys, but young men. The instructors have to physically separate them whenever they see each other. They both fall into a murderous rage. The instructors tell them that they will soon have their chance, and that the survivor will earn the right to a new face fashioned of plated bone. He wants that face. He wants it more than anything else in the world. They meet in the testing yard. A single blunted knife is thrown into the dirt between them. They need no further encouragement. In the melee that follows, the 2 teenagers stab and claw and bite. They rip chunks of flesh off each other and trade fractures for fractures, gouges for gouges. The knife tastes both of them, and the blunted blade snaps off between ribs as it is driven from one heart to another. The survivor pauses. He has forgotten which of the 2 young men he is. He no longer recognizes the face of the corpse before him, or his own reflection in the pools of blood. As he collapses, exhausted and almost spilled empty, he asks himself whether he is the one losing consciousness or the one with a blade in his ribs. He never learns the answer, but he forgets the question. They give him his 3rd and final face. He holds his new reflection in his hands, a grinning, lipless skull, thirsting for blood and carnage and death. When he dons the helm, he feels that face possess him. His essence burns in addiction, longing for mayhem and slaughter. He is the Eversaw now. He closes his eyes. That may have been minutes ago. It may have been centuries ago. He awakes in a banquet hall occupied by aristocratic portraits and long red banners. The roof is caved in from the force of his delivery pod, which vomits him forwards with a flashing green light of gleeful urgency. He is wearing his 3rd face and dressed in skin-tight black, needles sticking into his flesh and depositing lurid elixirs into his raging blood. One hand is a taloned claw made of syringes. The other naturally longs for the stylized 2-barrel pistol at his hip. He moves, faster than anything should move. It doesn't look real, like a buffering image on a pict screen. He shudders from one position to another without any sense of movement in between. They've noticed the drop pod. They know he's here, but he's already at the door. When the first guard steps through, the Eversaw twists the 7 vertebrae in their neck at an angle of 180 degrees, snapping the spinal cord and killing his prey in a single motion. Another guard runs up the corridor. They go for a Vox unit on their belt, seemingly in slow motion as the Eversaw draws his pistol in real time. He puts 2 needles in the femoral vein of his victim's thigh. The neurotoxins work swiftly, and the guard dances like a puppet on a string as their nerves misfire and send diseased signals to nearby muscles. A moment later, and the poison reaches their heart. The organ bloats into a grotesque swell before it pops, and the guard drops dead from a catastrophic aneurysm. He reaches the body before it hits the ground, covering 80 meters in a couple of seconds. His metabolism burns. Steam is captured inside his bodysuit and fed back into his blood to prevent immediate, incapacitating dehydration. The air shimmers where he has sprinted through. He turns the corner. More guards are coming. He counts them in the fraction of a second. 6. One limps on a bruised leg. Another is high on a combat substance, their eyes dilated beyond natural levels. He notices these things, and a dozen more. A burst of mass-reactive rounds scatters the group as 3 heads explode in a messy display of skull fragments and brain soup. The Eversaw chases after his bolt rounds. To build momentum, he leaps from wall to wall, and when he jumps from one side to the other, he fires another burst and blows out someone's stomach. The stench of digestive organs cuts through the physaline stink of his discharged weapon. The guard on combat drugs is fast enough to fire a single shot, the barrage of chems quickening their reaction time even as it savages their organs from the inside out. A las round whips towards the Eversaw, and he draws his power sword mid-flight, the blade absorbing the round within the molecular dissonance of its power field. He is on them now, and he swings the weapon such that it cuts through the left hip of his enemy, slicing along the innominate bone of their pelvis and out the other side. The guard falls, bisected, his two halves spinning off against the superhuman force of the strike. The same swing of the Eversaw's blade sheaths it in his scabbard, and he pounces on the final guard, punching 5 needles into their jugular vein and combat rolling to the side. He does not stop to see if the neuro gauntlet has killed his target. The guard screams a bubbling, grotesque shriek as their skin boils and their muscles decay into malformed slurry. The Eversaw keeps moving forwards, faster than the death he brings. The boom of bolt rounds has not gone unnoticed. Security procedures activate, procedures that the Eversaw knows intimately without understanding how he knows. Some work to his favor, others to his disadvantage. He lets the old and the children gather in the safe room of the south wing. It will save him the effort of chasing them down. Instead, he sprints west. He will cut off his targets at the central stairway before they reach the lander on the building's roof. He is the grinning face of death that blurs along crimson carpets and marble flooring. He is the monster that haunts beneath carven ceilings and against wainscot walls. He meets them in the main hall. The final bolt rounds in the chamber kills 2 of his targets and mortally wounds a third. They are on the mezzanine above him, and instead of scaling the stairs, he simply jumps from the ground floor to among them. 2 more are dead before he has fully landed, beheaded where his power sword has cut through the atlas bones. Another dies when he pumps a needle into their left gastric vein, clutching at their stomach as it swells and bulges before their eyes. Discounting the mortally wounded man, 4 remain. 1 is a young athletic woman with a noble bearing and a power sword in her hands, the hilt gilded and shaped into the raging maw of a mythical dragon. 2 are dressed in the robes of adepts, their mouths opening into terrified screams. The last is a bodyguard in well-fitted carapace with a melter gun aiming up towards the Eversaw. 5 things happen in under a second. The noblewoman lunges. Her sword arm is confident, her footwork is exceptional, but that doesn't matter. That is the first. The Eversaw sheaths his sword and pivots, allowing the woman's blade to sail 3 centimeters from his chest. This is the second. He steps inwards, putting himself inside the woman's reach and seizing her sword arm with the full grip of his neuro gauntlet. The injectors pump poison into her basilic vein, and she opens her mouth in readiness to scream. The third. His grip on the woman's sword arm, he spins them both about and plants her weapon into the bodyguard's torso. The power field breaks apart the carapace at a molecular level and opens his skin, carving through the sternum and popping the man's thymus gland beneath. The fourth. The Eversaw pivots again. He is still holding the woman's sword arm, and his sudden movement causes an olecranon fracture along her elbow as her sword cuts sideways through the bodyguard's chest. The blade slices through atria of the man's heart, and its heat causes blood chambers to swell as it carves a path through the superior lobe of the left lung. The fifth. The bodyguard drops. The noblewoman howls as the neurotoxins transforms her into something less than human. The Eversaw empties the rest of his pistol's needles into the 2 adepts, and they join the dead. He stoops over the mortally wounded man with his grinning skeletal mask, and watches as they bleed out from the carotid artery in their throat. He does not stay long. More guards are coming, and though he intends to kill them, his position on the mezzanine is exposed. He reloads in one smooth, practiced movement. He allows them to chase him into the portrait hall. He knows the layout of this palace better than they do. He funnels them into the narrow space. He will paint the portraits with their blood. There are 2 doors. To avoid being flanked, he transforms the battlefield into a 3-dimensional space. Each portrait is lit from above by a gargoyle holding a candle. He leaps up and runs the gambit of repulsive stone faces, his sword severing each pillar of wax so that the hall is gripped by an oppressive gloom. He disappears in the darkness and stares out from the black. The doors open. Narrow lines of illumination cut into the hallway, stabbing at the painted faces of old aristocracy. But they do not reach the center of the room, nor beyond the carnival shadows of the hideous gargoyles. The Eversaw watches as two squads slowly advance towards one another. They do not have stab lights, and they are terrified of the central darkness. He smells the sweat beading from eccrine glands, feels the fast beat of hearts, sees the wide dilation of pupils. Their adrenal glands are working on overtime, generating a fight or flight response, simultaneously focusing and dulling their minds into making quick, unconsidered decisions. The Eversaw silently unhooks one of the syringes that has emptied body-straining chems into his heart and throws it into the central darkness. The sudden movement activates an already overworking amygdala, which sends an immediate distress signal to a hypothalamus. An automatic nervous system goes into overdrive. Adrenal glands pump faster and faster. Small airways in the lungs open wide. Pulse rate increases. Blood pressure rises. A quick, unconsidered decision is made. A guard opens fire. The whip crack of his las gun twitches further trigger fingers, and now both squads are shooting. Beams of light banishing the darkness in the center of the hall. But there is no one there. No figure to absorb those beams of light in the form of cauterizing heat. The las rounds whip through to the other side, and both squads fire on each other. They are at close range, firing with semi-automatic weapons in a narrow corridor. After a second or two, they have stopped shooting, but already 9 of them are dead, and 6 more are injured. The Eversaw descends. He lands behind the remnants of the first squad. He lands low, like a cat. In one fluid motion, he hooks the door closed with his left foot, draws his sword and sweeps it across the ankles of 3 men. The power field parts skin, muscle and tibia bone, and 3 men scream as they are divested of their feet. There is firing, but the Eversaw is millimeters from the ground, and the las rounds pitch crippled, footless men to the wet carpet. The Eversaw draws his pistol and fires a semi-automatic burst of mass-reactive rounds, and the 2 remaining combatants are shredded as their ribs snap apart to form jagged shrapnel through their internal organs. One by one, the Eversaw meets each survivor and pricks them with the index finger of his neuro-gauntlet. He chooses a different vein for each victim. A cephalic vein, a radial vein, a saphenous vein, a femoral vein, a gastric vein, a thoracic vein. He is beginning to tire. He is on a concoction of murderous elixirs that overextend his body to the brink of explosive death. He shudders with pleasure as the systems in his bodysuit activate another needle, and another dose of shivering frenzy spills into his blood. He heads for the safe room. He does not meet any more guards. By his count, there are only 2 left, and they are likely with the old and the children. But this doesn't mean that the hallways are unoccupied. The Eversaw murders 24 serving staff along the way, leaving each behind as a mutilated, swollen corpse. The safe room door is concealed by wallpaper, a swimming pattern of flowers and thorns. The disguise is useless. He already knows where the safe room is, and in any case, he would have noticed the narrow fissures along the walls. He fixes a melter bomb in the center of the door. The vault is ceramite and plasteel, but the explosive is powerful, and the barrier will fail. He sets it for 5 seconds and paces at the edge of the blast radius, skull-socket eyes strained and thirsting. It feels like an eternity before the bomb explodes. Both guards are too close to the breach. The blast overpressure ruptures their eyes, savages their middle ears, and causes abdominal hemorrhage and perforation. They suffer fatal brain injuries and die instantly, along with an old woman clinging to a rosewood walking stick. The rest endure a variety of lesser symptoms that leave them blind, deaf, concussed, or bleeding. If not for the Eversaw, many of these injuries would be fatal. The Eversaw sprints inside. He makes a slaughter of them. They are children and the elderly. None of them attempt to fight back. He transforms their bodies into something greater than the sum of their mangled parts, a monument to blood and trailing nerves, an ode to screams and tearing muscles, an exhibit of carnage and absolute evisceration. This is the part he likes best. He clothes himself in their paint and drapes their tattered skin over his shuddering shoulders. He laughs. He is ecstatic. It feels warm. It is done. He allows himself a single moment to appreciate his art before he rushes away. He investigates every room and every corridor, and he kills every living thing he finds. He cuts apart servants, nursemaids, and house cats. He drives his sword along walkways and watches the power field ignite wainscoting into merry flames. Smoke taxes his augmented lungs. He is tired. The final syringe has emptied into him, and he is almost dry. He returns to the drop pod in the banquet hall and steps inside. The Eversaw closes his eyes. He awakes in a muddy field. He is already under fire. Las rounds scour the ceramite of his drop pod. He rolls into the gradient of a natural ditch as heavy bolters fill the air with high-caliber mass-reactive rounds. The syringes that connect to his circulatory system are refilled and pumping a heady mixture of chems that slow time and sharpen his reflexes to inhuman levels. He feels it in his blood, axons sparking across his nervous system, his twin hearts beating thrice its normal rate. The concentration is potent. It is probably lethal. He is not expected to survive. The Eversaw is not afraid. He is rabid, an animal with the tactical ability of an overcharged cogitator. Within that unnatural dichotomy, there is no room for the fear of death, and yet he is troubled by the cold sensation of hormonal boosters reacting with the hemoglobin in his veins. He feels cold. He wants to feel warm. He springs from the ditch and runs across open field. He moves faster than he ever has before. He sees bolts and las rounds and simply steps around them as they fly sluggishly past. He fires his own bolts. His aim is so precise and his timing so impeccable that each mass reactive impacts with enemy ammunition milliseconds after they are fired, triggering chain explosions that transform heavy bolter barrels into useless, churning metal. He sprints across 100 meters of uneven ground in 2.4 seconds. His bodysuit briefly catches fire from atmospheric compression, but he is too hopped up on the chems to notice the agony of his second-degree burns and welcomes the heat. His muscles are burning too, pushed to the very limits of physical and biological possibility. The detonation of the weapon placements has scattered the firing line of cultists. He empties his pistol into their milling ranks, bolt rounds separating them into meaty chunks as others convulse and bulge to the neurotoxins of his needles. They panic. Their fire discipline evaporates. They push at each other as they flee down their trenches, and he sails overhead like a hunting bird in swooping flight. The soles of his feet barely touch the ground. Most of his bodysuit is burned away, and great patches of red sore scar tissue are on display, bumpy, knitted flesh and scabbing burn wounds. He sees his target, and the final syringe injects directly into a swelling tachycardia heart. He draws his power sword. Its super dense core weighs 3 times that of any other weapon of its type. It may even weigh more than the crackling Crozius of his enemy, a Chaos Astartes, a dark apostle of the word. It does not matter. The target opens his mouth to voice a blasphemy that the Eversaw automatically files as tactically irrelevant. His crimson armor is littered with tattered parchment, perverse purity scrolls nailed through the ceramite and scribbled on in minuscule lettering. He does not wear a helmet. This, the Eversaw files as tactically relevant, a crown of irregular-shaped horns preventing such adornments. His accursed Crozius is an 8-flanged mace within a spitting power field, ridden with sorcerous energies. Its shaft bears the names of the Neverborn, infusing the weapon with further demonic power. The Eversaw is upon the Apostle before he finishes his dark prayer. The power sword cuts towards the Astartes' right flank. The Crozius moves to block, and the Eversaw redirects his swing, reversing its momentum. His biceps tear under the immense strain, but he lands his sword in the space between the Apostle's groin guard and his left leg. It is where the armor is flexible to allow a full range of movement, and it is where the armor is weakest. The super heavy power sword cuts through the mobility folds and severs the word-bearer's leg in a single chop. He knows that this will not kill his target. Even now, the Laraman's organ is releasing transhuman cells to the site of the mutilation, reacting with white blood cells and the air to form thick scar tissue across the stump. Space Marines do not die of exsanguination, but they can lose balance. Between the force of the Eversaw's strike and the sudden amputation of his leg, the Dark Apostle topples to the muddy ground. He roars in fury. He sweeps up his Crozius, but the Eversaw has already combat rolled away to absorb the momentum of his charge. The combat roll brings the Eversaw back onto his feet. He leaps into the air and angles down his sword. He contorts mid-jump to clear another swing of the accursed Crozius and lands his thrust into the Apostle's throat. The power field carves through thickened, unarmored skin. The blade punctures a ceramite-hardened trachea. Its point buries itself in the wet earth, forming a pivot between sword, ground, and bearer. When the Eversaw hits the ground, he yanks hard on the hilt. The blade slices along the pivot, half decapitating the word-bearer as the sword returns to the fizzling air. The Apostle splutters acid, a Betcher's gland is split, and the blood bubbles as the Space Marine chokes on his own venom. The Astartes writhes, his lips forming a silent prayer. His body shudders with racking force. It begins to rise upwards. The Eversaw can feel the chems in his body steaming through his pores. The syringes are empty. He begins to feel the torture of his burns and the ripping of his muscles. He feels his blood pressure plummet as his enlarged heart struggle. It feels cold. With the last strength he has left, he launches into the air and plants his power sword into the chest of the rising Apostle. He is weak now, and he strikes where the armor is strongest. It is not a mortal blow, but it still parts ceramite, black carapace and skin, and causes the fused ribcage beneath to bubble and partially melt. The word-bearer is chanting. His words are audible, even though he no longer has a throat. The Eversaw continues to smile. His third and final face is always smiling. He feels the metabolic carnage of his imminent death react with the onslaught drugs within him. His eyes gleam as a hideous soup of unnatural hormones and grotesque chems meet with explosive force, transforming his dying flesh into a chemical bomb. Melter bombs primed for this very moment detonate simultaneously. The power field in his sword erupts. His executioner pistol ignites. To all onlookers, it is a blazing eruption of brilliant destructive light. The Eversaw disappears in acrid fire, and the Dark Apostle is transformed into a collection of bloody giblets that rain down on the muddy ground. But this is not what the Eversaw perceives. He perceives much more. His glands are where the most powerful combustions begin. He feels them swell until the lining gives way and toxic gas spurts freely about his body. His skin stretches like an overinflated balloon as other organs ignite in poisonous fire. His muscles are fuel to that growing conflagration as his skin tears and his body pops. The detonation is unleashed from within to without, just as 3 melter bombs blow and form 3 spiraling corkscrews of flame. The blast overpressure accelerates the tearing of his expanding body and wrenches open the punctured ceramite of the Dark Apostle. That same force pops their eyes into putrid jelly. It causes the Eversaw's brain to slam into the skull with such force that his brainstem is partially severed from his spinal cord. That is when he stops perceiving. That is when he truly ends. His last thought is simple and joyous. His last thought is that he feels warm.
The ammunition loader was clogged with the grime and filth of 1,000 battles. All the same, all different. Aventus Locke pushed his gnarled index finger into the receiver to help clean out the discharge points and connector pins. He could do this with his eyes closed, yet not once had he been forced to do this across the battlesphere of the other half-dozen worlds he had fought on. This damnable place was a quagmire, and he fervently believed he would die here. All the while, the sounds of tens of thousands baying, snarling demons, mutants and heretics alike charged through the initial defense lines, long abandoned to the enemy. This was their 5th charge. He doubted he would survive to see a 6th. Pulling out the offending clog of brown matter from the receiver port, Aventus quickly checked the insertion pins on the las rifle charge pack. The last thing he would want to do is cause the weapon to malfunction with the enemy literally at his firing step. He was simply one of several thousand other riflemen on the front line.
a single defense boundary among 1,000 others on this pitiful world. A world among thousands across the galaxy, slowly being strangled to death by the ever-oncoming horde of foulness inimical to everything that was good in this galaxy. Almost as if the hands of Khorne were around the throat of the Imperium itself. Several of the men in his section felt the same way, yet not even one spoke their treasonous thoughts out loud, for fear of a bolt pistol to the cranium, courtesy of the commissar that traversed the ranks. Pointing his rifle at the oncoming tide of hate, he could not fail to secure a target. Yet he held his composure and fired at the onrushing tide of destruction as it reached firing range. 1,000 other beams of ruby light lit up the wall of bodies, yet for each one that fell, another 3 replaced it. Larger targets appeared as silhouettes in the gloom, and as thoughts of hope threatened to flee, he knew this was the end. However, hope was within reach, and it stood as a watchful guardian far above. He heard the recycling plasma coils hum into activation and looked up and behind. Several miles to the rear stood the Sentinel Wall, a crumbling, overbearing edifice of rockcrete and adamantium. Several more miles of earthwork defenses, donjons and lone bastion defense towers stood watch over the swarming foe. Long-range battle cannons fired their subsonic munitions into the morass, domes of body parts and blood mist mixed with incandescent fury and fire. Mushroom clouds of larger payloads from the defensive towers that flanked sections of the Sentinel line spoke of hardier targets successfully zeroed in. One particular bright flash, forever burnt into his memory, gave word to a larger kill. A god engine kill. Magnificum Furiosa stood vigil, casting a deep shadow across the front lines. The sun set, dust clouds reducing the heat glare from the system star to a sickly amber hue. Even so, the shadow dropped all in its vicinity into night periodically, until the Sun Fury Plasma Annihilator fired its nucleonic payload. To look upon the sphere of purest wrath was to be rendered permanently blind. It was fortunate then that the precursor to firing was a steady hum that dissipated before release. The god machine stood vigil over her mortal defenders, yet although her monolithic head was motionless, her attention was focused out into the distance. Out of range of anything short of a volcano cannon, its target was the same as itself. Another Titan. A rippling sphere of fury loosed from the plasma coils and heat exchange nozzles. The bolt of plasma flew as if a meteor had pierced the atmosphere, heat washing all below it with a painful burn. Aventus covered his visor as the plasma weapon was discharged, for fear it would render his actions this day moot. He looked back as the ball of fire traveled across the elliptic, hitting home against an unseen foe. The ripple of force and sudden surge of blast damage was phenomenal, knocking back all who were not prepared for the blast wave. Aventus ducked below the firing step before the immense shockwave knocked all in its wake to the ground. Hundreds of hungry mutants fell to their haunches, chipping teeth and claws into the quagmire. Most in the front line were trampled, but the rest simply stood back up, unfazed and charged on. Aventus watched as a mushroom cloud rose high above their heads, evidence of another engine kill. Yet where one lived, another would take its place, and the defenders, while numerous, were finite. Aventus hoped to see another sunrise, not the artificial sun of a plasma reactor overload, but an actual sunrise. He looked on as the system star fell below the horizon, for another night of carnage and madness to welcome them. Absolute terror seasoned the abject fear that bubbled deep down as clarion calls to slaughter were sounded, amidst cries of pain and torment from the overwhelmed scions of humanity. He glanced up at the lone defender for a spare second. Although his life could be measured in minutes, seconds counted. The warlord Titan prepared to fire its Vulcan megabolter shoulder weapons into the enemy numbers, and wondered what machinations were being undertaken aboard the command level, deep within the skull of the god machine. He had not time to wander, but merely sighted down his own weapon, found another target, and squeezed the worn trigger in his grasp.
Prepare a full spread across the western approach, Moderati.
Yes, my princeps.
Moderati ESEC 3 Gamma enunciated, even though a single binaric data shunt would suffice. Despite the Princeps commanding the forces below, liaising with over 100 different line commanders in the trenches and dictating firing solutions for the wall cannons, the data load was not overwhelming. The God engine stood where over half a dozen of their God engine brethren now lay in ruins. Burning, cooking, carbonizing durasteel and adamantine bones lay where the finest weapons of war once stood. As tall as edifying bulwarks against the damned, they were monuments to Martian might and imperial wrath. Where her legio was once grand and imposing, now she was alone, the creature known to imperial soldiery as Magnificum Furiosa, or Magnificent Fury in the Gothic tongue. The Princeps simply knew the machine spirit of the God engine as Mother, for she was a matriarch, as the Princeps was to her subordinates. Her human denomination was once known by the name Arcisaro Ebus. She preferred the name her former lover called her, Arca. Now, interred forever, permanently a part of the God machine as its machine spirit was, she was known by the call sign, Atrentos.
Mother, please heed me now for just another moment more. Continue this fight.
Atrentos implored her mechanical avatar of war to continue to purge the enemy from this land. It was her home once. Memories of this land faded into dark, replaced with the tide of devastation. She peered into the new spheric manifold and surveyed a 360-degree view of the battlefield. To the north, the defenses were faltering. Having sustained a significant armored assault, the defenders were being pushed back to the point of breaking and running for the defenses of the Sentinel Wall. Enemy scout walkers pushed deep across the forward lines, clearing a path for enemy tanks to traverse. Infantry swarmed across no man's land uncontested, while the defenders ran for the secondary trench lines, several hundred meters behind the main line of advance.
Order the Sentinel batteries to target those armored companies to the north. They threaten our flank, and we cannot alter trajectory quickly enough to prosecute the foe.
Atrentos ordered.
Compliance,
Said the barely human drone of a comm servitor, sending a data pulse to the slaved gunnery drones deep within the Sentinel gun batteries in charge of target acquisition and firing solution. A wall of fire, flame and plasma erupted from the Sentinel wall towards the northern breakout. Entire swathes of enemy detachments were annihilated and rendered to dust clouds, as several hundred kilotons of ordnance rendered the area a munitions wasteland. The sand and mud would become like glass in the extreme heat transfer, but the effect was all the same. Devastation, sudden demise of a flank attack, and an enemy left with a bloody nose. Ammunition within the confines of the Sentinel Wall and forward defense lines was scarce, and so Atrentos was reluctant to use its cannons for such fodder. They would be needed for more significant prey. She idly wondered if any of the requested aid for support would be answered. They had lost so many good soldiers of the Scutari brigades to secure a beachhead at the overwhelmed starport at Hive Agathon. The city was now rubble, after the cowardly destruction from orbit by the Dark Mechanicum forces. The foe would not find them wanting. The defenses of the Sentinel line and those of the Hive City behind said defenses were more significant. They would have to breach them directly to get to the juicy human offal hidden inside salvation bunkers. Billions of souls praying for a miracle to descend from the heavens. Yet nothing had come from the desperate mission. They were on their own, it would appear.
target acquisition, my Princeps.
A monocular, red-robed tech thrall spoke aloud, indicating a significant development was taking place across the long-range Auspex.
Confirmed. Plasma engine flares identified. Unable to locate specific target detail. Early scans suggest maniple strength.
She did not need a clarification of the number of foes. She knew from the individual heat signatures. 2 Reavers, 2 Warhounds, and a fellow Warlord Titan. Gas discharge and manner of disposition spoke of the Titan Legio present.
Legio Mortis. Death's Heads.
The name brought bile to her throat. She had particular enmity for the foe, but the opposing lead Princeps had been canny in their approach. They had either masked their energy signatures until in range for this engagement, or were held in reserve by the enemy commander until the best opportunity to strike. It also appeared in the long-range Auspex sweep that the lead Titan, a Warlord class, had been slowed by damage to its drivetrain, likely leg damage in another battle yet to be fixed. Atrentos smiled darkly at the thought.
You're good. I'll give you that.
As if conversing with the enemy commander. Whatever their plan, a Warlord, badly damaged but alive, was no small nut to crack. But against a full maniple, even that was perhaps too tall a task. Power cable couplings had ruptured above, sparking with electric wrath, while repair servitors tried to splice power conduits, restoring critical function to void shields and repairing motive systems. The Princeps' arm burned as if plunged in fire as the heat washed from her counterpart Reaver Titan's engine destruction left a damaging mark on her noospheric soul. The weapon misfired occasionally, with the magazine of ammunition in the Gatling blaster having cooked off in the aftermath. The corpse of Sun's Wrath lay broken and still aflame several kilometers ahead where she fell, and where the original defenses began. It had been several days ago at this point, and the damage was still prevalent. Atrentos hoped her servitor teams could repair critical damage in time for the enemy engagement. A chime spoke of an emerging contact across the human Vox network, directly requesting communication with the God Machine. The Princeps spoke up, requesting comms connection.
Put me through, Moderati.
Yes, my Princeps.
A shrill klaxon, followed by slight reverb, as the sound of a warrior with a deep commanding tone was heard through the Vox speakers.
Princeps Atrentos, this is Battle Captain Argentos Versio of the Blood Angels 5th Company, aboard the battle barge Victrix Nons. We are currently in orbit above your position.
The Sentinel war weapons array identified the unknown starship as it entered weapons envelope, and awaited for clarification before engaging.
Negative. Await further orders, Sentinel 2-1.
The binaric reply was cast. Guns reacquired ground targets while awaiting orders to engage the new threat.
We hear you, Captain Versio.
We received the distress call several weeks ago and engaged forces of the Alpha Legion at the Mandeville Point. We suffered moderate casualties during a profligate boarding assault. We are primed and ready to deploy now.
It was not a request for aid, merely a statement of fact. The Princeps knew agents of the Dark Mechanicum and Alpha Legion were in play in this system, but had only engaged the former. She wondered where the latter were. It would seem they acted as system rearguard to delay and harass Loyalist support.
We are preparing for a multiple strike insertion. Thunderhawk and drop pod deployment. Please advise on target and location.
The new spheric relay provided a detailed map of the war zone. The northern flank was breaking down again. The enemy had broken through once more, this time with weapons fire from the encroaching Reavers, while the ground forces pushed through the final defenses before reaching the Sentinel Wall. It was the last bastion of defense before the Hive City proper was reached. The rest of the Titans were progressing ahead, led by the Warhounds working in concert with several Dark Mechanicum, Automata and Demon engines.
Split your forces to cover the northern flank and attack the Titan engines to the center.
A swift binaric chime indicated agreement.
Understood. Drop pod deployment mapped and targeted.
A selection of runes in red blinked across the Auspex as the 10-man transports fell from the heavens. Their target was between the failing defenders and the enemy forces. 3 other runes indicated aircraft, 2 Thunderhawks and a Stormbird. They flew from orbit in an entrance arc towards the enemy Titans.
We will secure the flank while supporting your efforts against the enemy Titans.
The line went dead. As if called from a waking dream, blips of incandescent fire fell through the clouds, aiming between the Sentinel line and the enemy forces that threatened to overrun the defenders in their last stand. The infantry appeared like scurrying ants fleeing a child's uncaring boot. The super heavy Titan crushed all underfoot as drop pods thudded into the ground. They all made contact scant meters from the towering edifice and the doorways to the bastions proper. Clasps detonated and 60 Space Marines rushed out. Some in the dark, ruddy hue of Line warriors, some in the ebon black of the Death Company. All were warriors of renown and sheer spiteful fury and hatred of the foe. Curiously, Some of the Space Marines ran for the defenses, shooting some that ran across to the entrance doors. She believed them to be traitors, for the soldiers of the traitors and loyalists wore similar armor. She hoped the Space Marines would clear any interlopers, then reacquire targets and relieve the defenders, giving them the courage to about-face and fire at their pursuers. The rest held the front, bolters flickering like minute flashes of muzzle fire from the God Machine ocular sensors, while 3 more ident runes appeared across the long-range auspex, showing heading, angle of engagement, and no munition supplies. The first Warhound was targeted by slightly out-of-sync volcano cannon fire. They popped the void shields protecting the Titan with ease. The Stormbird then fired her own substantial weapon. The beam of light and heat annihilated the cockpit in a single volley, a pinpoint shot. Atrentos admired the martial act. The Titan was rocked back onto its heels, but it did not fall. Rather, it twisted as its munitions magazines cooked off, blasting out chunks of the other Titan's torso in its death throes. The torso armor was pierced in several places, before the reactor housing was ruptured and the plasma drive was finally ruined. The sphere of light dwarfed even that of the beam's intended target as the reactor went supercritical. The ball of light enveloped the Titan and surrounding forces at its feet. One of the Astartes' aircraft circling above tried to escape, only to be caught in the death wake. As the sphere of light reduced in size, a mushroom cloud appeared where once a Colossus once stood. Circling away in ever-descending rotations was the crippled Stormbird. Its rudder was badly damaged, but the winged angel was still airborne, but barely. The initial Warhound fell to the ground, a smoking husk on stilts. Its engine cooled as the decapitated torso crumpled and fell to the ground, crushing anything that remained underneath. It appeared the northern flank was secure, as the enemy forces left, wavered and retreated under bolter, lasgun and artillery fire from the rear defenses. The flyer exploded in a crescendo of violence as traitor return fire took out a wing. The Stormbird careened into a renegade Lehman Russ battle tank, taking out the traitor vehicle in its death zone. The smaller explosion merely added to the devastation, lost in the tumult. Such a loss of an ancient, venerated vehicle was felt dearly by the Princeps. She could almost hear its machine spirit, ancient as it was, cry out in anguish as it crashed into the tank. She cared little for the traitors, but the tank still had a spirit of its own, and all it spoke of was a desire to kill. Such a tainted machine did not deserve to live, so brought some semblance of vindication to her heart. Refocusing on her own field of war, she locked in her next targets, a collection of Chimera transports speeding towards the front lines she protected. A single volley of her volcano cannon put an end to the daring push.
Come in, Princeps Atrentos!
It was the Space Marines aboard the Thunderhawk that had survived the Titan death. They were circling to find an area to land and prosecute the land battle. Given how the enemy forces were pressing in, safe zones were few and far between.
I hear you, Captain.
I have lost contact with my forces securing Sentinel Wall. Can you confirm their status?
She had lost contact with her own forces too inside the edifice. Usually, the new sphere would be alive with comms traffic, target acquisition orders, reload requests, reactor status, repair team calls to fix structural defects caused by the torque of the solid-state ammunition cannons. The comms had been silent since the Titan destruction. She simply believed they were in awe of the firestorm that engulfed it. However, it was more than that. There was an absence of contact, a void in communication. What did it mean? Had there been a signal interrupt, a new weapon of the enemy? The dreaded scrap code they promulgated all those years ago on Calth, each Titan knew instinctively of that atrocity. A single beam of fire from behind the Titan caught the Thunderhawk as it circled ahead. The flyer erupted in flame. A dozen screams could be heard over the Vox signal, left open by the captain aboard that vessel. It broke up in flight, dropping like dead flies caught by an electric surge. It shattered on impact, breaking apart, the inhabitants dead before the collision. Atrentos turned her attention to the source of the beam. It was a single defense cannon. Overkill. Perhaps it was an errant mistake. She hoped it was a misfire. Issues with targeting parameters. The second beam hit the lone warlord's void shield, causing it to blister and die. The overpressure caused the behemoth to rock from the impact, but the Titan regained its composure. Alert Rune screamed within the cockpit. It spoke in Binaric with one voice, a single word. The word in Low Gothic was one shared by anyone witness to the turn of events. Treachery. A dozen target runes appeared to the front and back of the Titan. The enemy Maniple used the Void Shield collapse as a call to action, turning all their weapons towards the lone towering Ronin in adamantium and armored ceramite. Hurt, but still lethal. It may survive a single volley, but targeted from the front and rear, it stood little chance. Fire from the defense lines grew in intensity, almost as if reading the change in fate. Rather than give up and die, the defenders at her feet fought with greater ferocity. She would make it a good death. Aventus Locke watched on in horror as the Titan high above was embraced in flame and fury from ahead and behind, as the wall defenses had a change of heart regarding their allegiance. The forces in front appeared to stand transfixed, until a single call, a roar cried out in exultation at the change of fate. Aventus Locke did not believe it, and merely ramped up his frenetic pace of fire, feeling the gun grow ever hotter in his hands. He must not lose hope now. A comms operator, shot through the head by a sniper in the morass ahead, still had an active Vox line to the Titan command level. He could hear hectic calls for support, clarification of enemy numbers, and a Titan princeps furious with the turn of fate. Curious and filled with dread for what Pandora's box he might open by listening in to the tense exchange, he put on the Vox headset and listened in, all the while firing without pause as the enemy drew in closer, now a mere couple dozen meters away.
What is the meaning of this sentinel wall? You have forsaken your oaths.
We were never allied as such. Surrender, and we will let you live. Your strength will be added to our own.
Under what authority? I would rather die than turn traitor.
Then your request shall be granted.
Several beams of light, volleys of heavy shot, and a collection of Apocalypse missiles struck the Titan from all sides. The remains of the damaged left arm weapon was enveloped in flames, destroyed at the elbow connector. The weapon fell from its housing, exploding as it hit the deck. The Titan rocked sideways, torso forcefully turning 45 degrees to the right under concussive impacts. The lone defender tried in vain to right itself, only to be hit again, this time from the rear. Chunks of adamantium shattered, each shard as big as a tank, crashing into the earthworks behind it, killing part of the reinforcement regiment as it made its way forward in support. Aventus Locke could not spare time to watch, for fear of the horror that threatened his very existence ahead of him. 12 meters.
Your voice. This is not the Magos in command, is it?
It is not.
You are Astartes?
Yes.
Another blast, this time from the front, hit the sternum of the Titan. It melted under the intense heat exchange. The core was now partially exposed. The next blow would kill it. Aventus Locke pulled the trigger. Click. Charge depleted. He checked his ammo supply. One last magazine, about 40 shots. He still had a salvaged sidearm. He unclasped it, ready for close-up work. Several more of his kin fell back, solid shot reducing flesh to ruddy paste and bone fragments.
What is your name? I do not believe a blood angel capable of such atrocity.
The wall cannons could be heard getting ready to fire the kill shot. Aventus Locke watched the defense line gutter and die in a wave, as they were overwhelmed by mutant, heretic, and demon alike. He dropped the spent las rifle and readied his sidearm to kill whoever was next, the foe or himself. The commissar was dead, so no risk of summary execution for dereliction of proper weapon maintenance. It was now kill or be killed. He barely paid attention to the baying cries of hate less than a handful of meters in front. The wave crested at the firing step, ready to drown them all in blood and fury.
They did not take all of us. We are the shadow, the unknown foe, those that walk in your colors.
No.
The single-word reply from a nearly dead princeps called out in vain at the realization. A shell the size of a battle cannon struck the Titan from the rear, cracking the reactor housing. It flared with a neon blue light as it went critical. Seconds remained. The scream of the princeps as her heart was obliterated was blocked out by the ramped-up Vox reply heard across all Vox bandwidths.
I am Alfarius.
The plasma core of the Magnificent Furiosa went supercritical. A sphere of star-bright light blinded Aventus Locke, as a rusty polearm was thrust deep into his abdomen, spilling his entrails over the weapon and the mutant that held it. His las pistol, cut from his grasp along with the hand that held it, fired as nerve impulses in the detached limb fired autonomously. It hit the trench wall, leaving a small scar in the dirt and corrugated steel there, before being showered in gore. He prayed to the God Emperor, only to hear the laughs of things that should not be. At least his death would be swift, as the core of the God machine high above went nova, embracing all within its touch to a quick and agonizing end. The last words that filled his mind before his soul was extinguished echoed as if scarring his soul. The same 3 words that spelled doom and yet were held in mystery. He did not know his killer, nor his rationale for betrayal, yet he knew his name. The name that now filled his ears as he was immolated in nuclear fire. I am Alfarius.